comprise the Environment and Transportation Committee. So here are the order of the bills. The first two bills will be Delegate Morgan, House Bill 219, which is a golf cart bill, so a dreaded golf cart bill, and House Bill 537, which is a motor vehicle bill by Delegate Morgan. We then go to the Vice Chair, Delegate Stein's two-man crew bill. We then have two bills from Delegate Healy, 353 and 391. Then House Bill 367, Delegate Charkoudian. House Bill 519, Delegates Jones and Bagnall, and which has unicycles, and House Bill 545, Delegate Hartman. And with that, welcome to the Environment and Transportation Committee, Delegate Hartman number 1. Hartman number 2 is over there. So it's his. I mean Hartman.
That's Morgan. My dad.
Delegate Morgan. Yeah. Well, when he's here, he's in charge of keeping you in order, and me apparently. So, yep. So, welcome to the committee. You have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee, vice chair. Good to be in front of ENT. It's the first time I'm presenting a bill to y'all this session. So I got 2 back-to-back and very quick bills. I promise it won't take much time, but I have a quick PowerPoint here to kind of show you and drive home a little bit of what we're trying to do. Everyone recognizes this map. Sometimes us in St. Mary's. Not real sure if people know where we're at, but we're at the bottom of the state, right next to that green arrow there. And the thing about St. Mary's that you'll notice is, if you zoom in on the county, it's surrounded by a lot of water. We're on a peninsula. And we have actually more coastline than any other county in the state. It's like 440 some miles. And in this coastline, there's tons of these little neighborhoods. And this one is what I would call Golden Beach. And that doesn't look like a very big area, but there's about 4,000 houses in that area. And what you have is, since we're on a peninsula, you get a lot of these, like there's 2 really main roads that run through St. Mary's County, Route 235 and Route 5. And then you have some state roads that crisscross, but you have a lot of these smaller county roads that are on dead ends, and they're in like kind of tight neighborhoods with like skinny streets. So back in 2017, we were trying to figure out a way to really get traffic off the streets in St. Mary's County. This particular neighborhood has 4 public beaches. It has a really active civic association. So there's people riding around all the time down there, and we're trying to get cars just off the streets and allow for a little bit more room. So here's the part where the chairman probably hates me. In 2017, we passed one of the... There's probably more reasons, I get you. But back in 2017, we passed one of the first golf cart bills, I believe, in the state. But thank you for that. And look, the program's been wildly successful in that neighborhood I was just showing you, Golden Beach. This is taken from their 4th of July parade. If you were actually there was golf carts everywhere. And it's been very successful at getting cars off the road. So with that, we've drawn up a bill to hopefully not come up for every single neighborhood. There's a reason there's a golf cart model up by the chairman, because I think since we passed this bill, your committee's been inundated with golf cart bills. So what I've done is drawn up some legislation that only applies to St. Mary's County. There should be an amendment. It should be a local delegation bill. It was drafted in my name, and I dropped it before we changed it over. But it should be a delegation bill. And what it allows is our county commissioners to set up these golf cart zones if a certain stipulation applies. We would prefer dead-end streets, but speed limits under 35 miles per hour. So these things aren't out on the highway or causing any other traffic jam. They're really just, the theory is the county wants to set these up for really low speed traffic areas, much like Golden Beach, that would actually get cars off the road and help pedestrians out there. So that's the theory. With that, I've always been asked, golf carts, kids driving them and stuff like that, you still have to be a licensed, registered motorist to drive one of these. And there also needs equipment as far as lights and turn signals and stuff like that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions your committee might have.
Sure, we're going to hear from Andrew Aziz, and then we'll go to questions. Is Mr. Aziz with us? Well, in that case, we're going to go straight to questions, and the first goes to Delegate Boyce.
Hi, my friend.
Hey, good. How are you?
Good. Thank you for bringing us. Just a really dumb question. What is the maximum speed, miles per hour that a golf cart can go?
I don't know how fast a golf cart can go. So I'm sure they have some that are pretty fast, like a Tesla type golf cart. Every golf cart I've ever been on seems to go around 20 miles per hour.
Okay.
The legislation calls for only on roads under 35. So in case we get some crazy county commissioners that want to try to put these on faster streets, they're held down because of state this bill. But really, that's just not the intent.
Makes sense. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Delegate.
you.
Yeah, I've got a question. These are going to be on what kind of, they're not obviously going to be on state roads. Are they county or city, or what kind of roads are these?
So it would only be on county roads.
Okay.
That's the way the legislation was drafted for the Golden Beach area.
Okay.
And the way we envision this is really just in these tight neighborhoods. Because down in St. Mary's County where we're at, we do have a lot of other traffic. And when I mean by other traffic, I mean Amish with horse and buggies. So we don't want to add to any more of that confusion on state highways. Matter of fact, this wouldn't be put on, you wouldn't even have the right to cross a state highway the way this is drafted.
Any further questions for Delegate Morgan on House Bill 219? Yes, here we go. Delegate Healy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, you mentioned that this should have been a local bill, and my question is, will you be getting a letter of support from your delegation?
Oh, that should be there already. It's not?
Okay, that's fine. I haven't looked.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Fine.
Look, there should be local support, and I believe there's also a delegation support. And if not, ask my father right here. He'll turn it right over.
Thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 219. Delegate Morgan, now House Bill 537.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, just to split up the bills, Delegate Matt Morgan on House Bill 537, which is fines and required notices by the MVA. So I'm sure there's probably a lot of people on the committee that's also had this issue before. I had a constituent who lives in St. Mary's County, but works in Northern Virginia. And him and his girlfriend rented an apartment over in Northern Virginia. And as a qualification for their lease, they were required to have renter's insurance. So he calls Geico up, gets his renter's insurance, and Geico, for some reason, removes the insurance off his car, off the tag. And, he gets a little increase because he's living in Northern Virginia, but he's paying his car insurance and thinks everything's okay. Anyway, this was in August of 21. So some time goes by. It's the following July. He gets a ticket over in Alexandria for having dead tags on his car. And he's like, well, God, I was never notified. So he promptly calls MVA Monday morning, and they said, oh, yeah, you can renew your tags, but you haven't had insurance on your vehicle since last August. You owe us $2,145 in fines. And I'm like, he calls our office. I'm like, that's crazy. We don't charge somebody that much money if they're, if they stole a firearm, for God's sakes. So with that, this bill, the only thing this bill does is require the MVA, if the fee is recurring. There is an amendment on the bill, and I know MVA turned in some opposition testimony, and I'm hoping this amendment addresses their concerns. It's just for a fine that accrues over time. So the way this one particular fine works for MVA, you're fined $150 for the first 30 days. And after the 30 days, it's $7 a day until you hit the maximum of $250, which can add up to be a lot of money, especially if you don't know that you're accruing these fees. So MVA, in their opposition testimony, talked about being turned over to a collection agency after 30 days. Well, that's not my experience of what the department has been doing, and certainly not the experience of what this constituent found out. So with that, I would, if you've had this situation with any constituents before, take a deep look at it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, because essentially this bill just requires MVA to notify if you're having a recurring fee every 30 days.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. First question goes to Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate.
Hey, good afternoon.
You mentioned an amendment. Do we have that?
You should have an amendment.
Okay,
It's
I
not
don't
with the committee.
see it. No, can you make sure to get it to us, please?
Yeah, I'm sorry if it's not there. I thought the committee drafted the amendment. But basically, the amendment says,
see it.
for a fine or fee that accrues additionally costs over time after, meaning recurring costs. So if it's not there, I will get it there promptly right after this hearing.
Great,
and I
thank you.
apologize for that.
Thank you.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Terraza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this bill. Does this also apply to tolls?
No, because I don't believe tolls are recurring. So like a toll fee would be like a one-time flat fee of X amount of dollars, I believe. And then it doesn't accrue additionally, It's just a flat fee.
So when you say it accrues, you're not talking about additional fees?
Yes, I'm talking about, it just deals with fees that compound. So in this particular scenario, I'll read you the letter from the MDOT here. Should have brought my glasses. It says the vehicle rate of $150 for the first 30 days and increases by $7 for each additional day after. So it's a compounding fee. And look, we've had this with several topics dealing with like real estate before, where, landlords were not allowed to just keep piling up the fees. I would think government would be the same way.
No, just to clarify, I don't have a problem with what you're saying. I'm just wondering how it's different than the toll fees that we've heard about over the years, and maybe I'm confused. I may be confused because I'm seeing.
Well, it is a different agency, so there's that.
Well, a different agency, okay, but I am right. Okay, so
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the toll situation like firsthand, but I thought the toll fees were just like if you ran the toll, you got penalized for it. It wasn't something that accrued daily or monthly. There might have been some late fees associated with it, but that's not what this bill addresses.
So you're saying this is different than late fees?
Yeah, this would be a recurring compounding fee. And my worry is, and the problem that we're trying to solve is people aren't being notified. They send out the one letter, and I'm sure like many of your districts in St. Mary's, we seem to have a huge problem with the Postal Service. Like this constituent was never notified, and then all of a sudden they go to MVA to renew their tags, and they have this whopping fee. So this bill just makes the MVA tries to best known contact them via text message, emails, or a mailed letter every 30 days.
Thank you, Delegate. I completely understand that. I was just as concerned about the tolls. It doesn't mean I'm not concerned about what you're talking about. I appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Before I recognize the next question, so basically, because they got an apartment in Northern Virginia, Pepco assumed they were no longer living in the state of Maryland and
Yeah,
switched off their...
Geico assumed they were no longer
Not
living in the
Pepco,
sign of
Geico,
Maryland.
yeah.
Yeah. And I've had constituents with this issue before. This one was just such an astronomical fee.
Yeah.
And the guy's kind of young and, that's, I mean, $2,100, that's a lot.
Yep, okay. Next question goes to Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Delegate Morgan, for bringing this. That is a huge amount of money to be surprised with. I'm trying to understand, you took us through the, I think, $150 initial fine, and then the $7 a day after 30 days. And then it seemed to me, I was trying to follow that trail, and you ended it where it got to $250. I'm not understanding how it then got to 2,900 and change. Where
So no, that's not. It wasn't 2,900. I'm looking at the letter right here. His total fine and penalty was $2,145. So I guess that added up at $7 a day after the first 30 days.
Okay.
So I believe, and this isn't in the bill. This is MVA's letter here that they, finally when we inquired about it.
I guess I thought I heard you say that the $7 a day stopped when it got to the point of 250.
No, 2,500.
Oh, 2,500.
Yes, that's the maximum fine that you can accrue.
Okay, and then the difference between that and where it got to closer to 3,000 was what, additional?
Well, there's no 3,000. So when he called the MVA finally, after he's got a ticket for having dead tags, he didn't realize his tags were dead. They were like, yeah, before you can get tags, you got to pay $2,145. That's what's actually been accruing since Geico removed your insurance, which seems really, really high for this situation, especially since he was paying car insurance. So.
Okay, and if you don't mind me asking one more question, Mr. Chair, to get back to how are you trying to solve that problem then with the bill?
Well, we're just trying to solve the problem because this is a legitimate concern from the NBA.
Absolutely.
You can't remove insurance from a tag. I'm just saying that NBA, if they're going to have a recurring fee like that, they need to make more than one attempt to contact the person to say that you're having a recurring fee. And that's all the bill does. Every 30 days, if you're accruing this fee, they have to send you a notification that the bills are piling up. So it doesn't lower a fee or try to get anybody out of anything. It's simply a notification bill.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing this. I think people don't realize too, and I know, young, I incurred this same issue.
Okay.
Although it never got to that much, but I definitely did have to pay $150. It's a lot of money not to have insurance. So the question I have, because I certainly agree with you, it's kind of ridiculous, I think, in the first place, but have you talked to the Maryland Insurance Administration? Because what I'm also hearing is that, I think with Geico somewhere they allow you to bundle.
Yeah.
And it sounds like through their bundling allowance that then they assumed that where one works, where one lives is all the same thing, your homeowner's insurance. You can bundle
Right.
all these things. So I'm wondering, first of all, thank you for bringing this bill, but two, have you checked with the insurance agency to make sure other folks aren't going to get caught up in thinking they can save money by bundling and then get into this type of situation?
So on this particular issue, we didn't have much luck with the insurance administration.
Sorry.
But I did have luck with the lobbyists for Geico
Sure.
over in Virginia.
Okay.
And we did, I'm happy to say, did get this particular case resolved for this constituent.
Thank you.
But that doesn't, since I brought this bill forward and you look at the co-sponsor list, there was a bunch of people that I've mentioned in legislature like, oh yeah, I've had that happen to me too. And look, the fine should be stiff. I mean, look, if people are driving around, in my opinion, without insurance, that's a big problem. And that's the reason why this fine is pretty expensive. But on the same token, if it's an honest mistake, I feel like the MVA should do their due diligence to contact those people because, we don't want to run up fines accidentally.
I 100% agree with you. I think it's a good bill. We need notices before it gets to $2,100 that none of us have right now. I was just wondering if you checked in with the insurance administration. You sound like you did.
I did, and
Sorry you didn't get anywhere.
yeah, it wasn't as productive as I hoped, but.
Okay, any further questions for Delegate Morgan? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. Y'all have a great day.
Okay, you too. All right, let's next go to House Bill 352, two-man crew. Yes, you may. Bring up your panel. You know the drill.
Okay.
Start whenever you want to. You get 4 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. For the record, Delegate Dana Stein. This, as you know, is known as the two-man crew bill or two-person crew bill. Our committee and the House of Delegates have passed it 4 times, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021. This is a public safety bill. It requires that each freight train that shares tracks with passenger and commuter rail trains have a minimum crew size of 2 persons. The impetus for the bill was a train disaster that happened several years ago in Canada when a freight train with a single-person crew derailed, killing 47 people and wiping out much of a town. After the accident, the Canadian government mandated 2-person crews for freight trains. 8 states have enacted a 2-person crew requirement, and so far in 2023, this legislation has been introduced in 18 states. Most recently, you probably have read about the fiery derailment of a freight train in Ohio earlier this month. The train carried dangerous chemicals, and nearby residents have been evacuated. The headline in a story in USA Today about the accident read, quote, "Trains are becoming less safe. Why the Ohio derailment disaster could happen more often." Now, in addition to the type of disaster that happened in Ohio, there are thousands of grade crossing accidents every year. These are accidents where railroad tracks and automobile roads cross. In 2021, there were more than 2,000 of these grade crossing accidents across the country, with 670 injuries, 234 fatalities. So as the data shows, these freight train accidents can be very deadly. And on top of that, it's not easy to operate a freight train. These trains can be 2 or 3 miles long, and they can carry hazardous cargo. That's why nearly every freight train that's operating in America today operates with a 2-person crew, a licensed conductor and engineer. Now, circling back to the safety connection, when there is an emergency, such as at a grade crossing, a single crew member cannot assess the accident, secure the train, and notify all emergency responders. The engineer has to stay on board. Only if there's a second crew member can that person get off the train and address any injuries or life-threatening issues. There's a good example in my written testimony of a real life-saving situation that could not have happened with a single-person crew. Now, some points about what the opposition will say. They will claim that the bill is in conflict with federal law. But 3 days ago, the Maryland Attorney General's office confirmed that it's quite possible that a court would find that this bill was authorized as a safety measure under federal law and would not be preempted. The opponents will refer to a 2021 case about an Illinois law that's not the same as this bill. The Maryland Attorney General's office said that the Illinois case does not change their conclusion, and their letter is with my testimony. Also, opponents may claim that we should let the Federal Railroad Administration, or FRA, decide the issue. The FRA has issued a proposed 2-person crew rule, but there's no guarantee that the FRA will finalize the rule. And as we all know, a regulation can always be changed by a new president. Lastly, the professional firefighters of Maryland are strongly in support of the legislation, but missed the testimony deadline. They believe the bill is very important to public safety. So we're back here asking for your support for this. The 2 times when the full General Assembly passed the bill, 2018 and 2019, Governor Hogan vetoed it. 88% of Marylanders support the bill, according to a 2019 survey, and I urge a favorable report. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Who would like to go next? Larry?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Larry Casey-Camp, Smart TD Legislative Director here in strong support of this rail safety legislation. I know most of you have heard these presentations and voted in support in the past. I just want to touch on a few specific issues. The collective bargaining agreement issue and the fiscal note, which speculates a $6 million cost to the state if the bill passes due to the access agreement signed by CSX and the Hogan administration. The fiscal note says this additional cost can only be kicked in when unions agree to less than two-person operations. I've spoken to the president of SMART and the general chairman who hold the collective bargaining agreements with CSX and Norfolk Southern, and they assured me they have no intention of negotiating such collective bargaining agreements. Collective bargaining agreements contain agreed-to provisions. It's not my way or the highway. So for anyone to speculate that less than two-person crew collective bargaining agreement will be in place by 2025 is absurd. And when this access agreement comes up for renewal in 2026, I think it will be looked at a little differently because there's a new sheriff in town. Regarding the railroad's claim it's a collective bargaining issue dating back to the 1900s, I can tell you it was a contentious collective bargaining issue when I hired on the railroad in 1977 until the early 1990s. That's when the railroads and the union agreed to go from 3 crew members to 2 crew members and agreed to a moratorium on the issue until all employees at that time had left the industry, and that's, excuse me, has not occurred today. The railroad sued in court to force the unions to negotiate crew size before the moratoriums they agreed to have expired. If the courts ignore the moratoriums and require the parties to address crew size, it still doesn't mean two-person crews are going away. Just like the railroads have refused to agree to provide paid sick leave to their workers in every collective bargaining agreement proposed in my 45 years in the railroad industry, neither does the union have to agree to future changes in crew size. Thank you for your time, consideration, urge a favorable report.
Okay, who'd like to go next?
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Matt Darby, good to see you.
Good to see you, Matt.
In addition to my state workers' comp practice, I'm also been practicing for 30 years in the area of railroad law and designated legal counsel for many railroad unions and president of the Academy of Rail Labor Attorneys currently. I'd like to just briefly address the 3 preemption arguments. The first deals with the question of whether or not this law would be preempted by the FRA. The second is whether it's preempted by the federal, the 3R Act of 1973. Both of those are addressed in the Illinois case that Delegate Stein addressed. The Ninth Circuit determined that the FRA would not be preemptive, any FRA regulation would not preempt the law. Clearly, the enabling legislation for the FRA and its mission allows states to regulate safety issues. With respect to the 3R Act of 1973, it's important to put that in the context of what the law was meant to accomplish, which was to address the chaos that was the freight rail system in 1973. And at that point, there were 5 crew members on a crew. There clearly was redundancy. It was to address economic issues and not safety issues. The courts have held that with respect to anything that deals with safety, that the 3R Act of 1973 would not preempt that. Lastly, the question of whether or not the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act would serve to preempt this law, and the answer to that is also no. The Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act created the Surface Transportation Board. Clearly, it complements the FRA, but addresses in its exclusive jurisdiction the construction, acquisition, and so based on that, I would say that it would not be preempted. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that very rapid analysis. Who'd like to go next?
Me, Mr. Chairman. My name is Gerald Jackson. I'd like to thank you and the committee members. I'm the Secretary Treasurer for the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO, and on behalf of President Donna Edwards and 300,000 union members who we represent, I'd like to offer the following comments in support of House Bill 352. As union representatives, we all take pride in representing our members to provide them with good wages, health care benefits, safe working conditions, and the ability to retire with a pension and dignity. Our members know their contribution to the labor force is valuable and appreciated. In the work environment, the safety and well-being of our members is of the utmost importance. None of the collectively bargained wages, benefits, and working conditions are worth anything if our members do not make it to retirement due to being injured or killed on the job. The thought of a 2-mile-long freight train operating through our communities should be frightening to each and every one of you. Whether you're from Cumberland or Baltimore, the railway systems are integral in the transportation of freight and passengers alike. I cannot imagine an accident like those highlighted recently happening in any community in Maryland. Common sense dictates that for safety reasons, 2-person crews are the first step in protecting the citizens of Maryland from unnecessary close calls and accidents. None of us in this room want to be asked, why did we not support the common sense safety legislation if a tragic accident happened and a second crew member could have prevented it or mitigated the damages from it? All of organized labor stands in solidarity with our rail workers, brothers and sisters. I have a list of 12 other organized locals who have written supportive testimony: AFT Maryland, Baltimore, DC, Building Trades, CWA, Communication Workers, IBEW Locals 24 and 26, the Maryland State Pipe Trades Association, which I'm a member of, Smart 100, UAW, UFCW 27. I'm out of time and I'm not finished. Anyway, all of Maryland workers stand behind this legislation, and hopefully we have a favorable approval.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
That's it.
Is David Pendleton here? Yes, sir, I am. Oh, come on up. And if Tom Cahill is out there, you can come up as well. Welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Chairman Barvey and members of the Environment and Transportation Committee, my name is David Pendleton, Legislative Advisor for the Smart Transportation Division in Maryland, and 19-year conductor for Amtrak here in support of HB 352. SMART members work as the conductors and engineers on board freight and passenger trains operating in Maryland. HB 352 is a proactive rail safety legislation that protects the safety of the rail workers, the environment, and the communities freight trains operate through by mandating a minimum 2-person crew on certain freight trains. Historically, safe working rules and procedures for rail workers have been written in blood. In 1996, in Weyervega, Wisconsin, the town had to be evacuated due to a train derailment containing hazardous materials. The conductor prevented a greater tragedy by separating the non-derailed cars from the fire-engulfed derailed cars. Following the accident, Wisconsin passed their 2-person crew requirement in the law. In 2013, in Lac-Mégantic, Canada, a 1-person train operation contributed to a runaway train that derailed, killed 47 persons, and essentially destroyed the town. Following this tragic accident, Canada banned 1-person freight train operations. Regrettably, there is no similar federal or Maryland law regulation requiring a minimum of 2 persons on freight trains. HB 352 would fix this safety hazard. The railroads consistently argue that states shouldn't act on crew size because the Federal Railroad Administration is going to issue regulations. The FRA has been in the process of issuing a crew size rule since 2013. That's 10 years, 3 presidents, and numerous FRA administrators, still no rule. The railroads insist that crew size is a collective bargaining issue. No amount of money or benefits negotiated are worth the harm that could come to rail workers, the environment, or the public if a tragic accident occurs due to a 1-person crew. The General Assembly is farsighted when it comes to rail safety. This is evidenced by their passage of this legislation numerous times. Sad to say, each time it was vetoed by Governor Hogan. We sincerely urge another favorable report on HB 352 to move this to the desk of our new governor, Wes Moore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Tom Cahill up there? Oh, there you go. Welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Chairman Barvey and members of the committee. My name is Tom Cahill. I'm Maryland born and raised and have been a licensed locomotive engineer and conductor for CSX for 27 years. I want to share my insight and safety concerns as they pertain to HB 352 and the important benefits the passage of this bill will have on public safety and the safety of railroad employees. the bill as presented requires at least 2 railroad employees for freight train movements on shared commuter lines within the state, which is critically important. As an engineer who has been involved in many accidents, I can tell you that the atmosphere after striking a trespasser or hitting an automobile at a crossing is chaotic. Since the engineer must remain in the locomotive cab, having the second crew member to immediately assess the situation and act is paramount to public safety. A second crew member is vital in that they can instantly tend to the injured, contact emergency services, and clear block crossings for emergency vehicles or the public. Even under the best operating circumstances, train crews have myriad intangibles that must be tactfully dealt with. A single employee cannot safely, efficiently, or promptly perform all the required functions that are necessary on even the most routine trips, in addition to operating the train and keeping a vigilant lookout for the unexpected. Representatives of the railroads argue that with positive train control, there is no longer a need to have a second person in the operating cab, but 2-person train crews look out for each other in ways that no onboard electronic device can. Our freight trains approach 3 miles in length and carry many hazardous materials. Any incident that would stop these trains could block off an entire town. It is critical that a second crew member be in position to immediately clear road crossings for emergency vehicles and the public. In addition, a single crew member cannot properly secure a freight train that is to be left unattended. This could result in a runaway that would wreak havoc on any one of our towns or metropolitan areas. One only has to recall what happened in Lake Magenta, Quebec, Weyauwega, Wisconsin, or most recently, East Palestine, Ohio, as proof. In closing, on behalf of myself and my coworkers and for the safety of the public, I urge you to support the passage of HB 352.
Thank you. We have 2 more people. The final 2 people signed up in favor are Emily Ranson and Herbert Harris. If you would come up and testify, we can then go to questions. Who would like to go first? Emily? Okay, terrific.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Barve, members of the committee. I am Emily Ranson with Clean Water Action, here in support of this legislation. We have a keen interest in making sure that our trains that are carrying various substances have adequate crew to respond to disasters and prevent them. Many places in Maryland there are many vulnerable places in Maryland where railroad tracks run along rivers, and a big one I want to highlight is the Potomac River, which is the drinking water source for millions of people in the DC area. We also have numerous at-grade crossings where you have significant risk of vehicle strikes. A main area where we have been concentrated on some rail safety initiatives have been in South Baltimore, where there are enormous numbers of large at-grade crossings where residents are frequently expressing concern about adequate safety as well as preparedness. We actually first became very interested and aware of rail safety after Lac Mégantic, when we were working on crude oil transport and the safety concerns heading into the Port of Baltimore. So while 2 crew members is not a panacea, it alone cannot guarantee that disaster will be avoided. It does include an important safety check to guard against disaster and respond to problems as they arise. So thank you, and we urge a favorable report.
All right, thank you very much. And Herb Harris, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Herbert Harris with the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, and I represent the operating locomotive engineers that operate Amtrak, MARC, Penn Line, as well as Virginia Rail Express. So I have the benefit of the entire regional look at the passenger and commuter rail system. I stand here on behalf of our members this afternoon to encourage a favorable report and approval of HB 325, and this is my 4th iteration with this bill before the committee and Chairman Barve on it. 2 things have already been mentioned that I won't repeat, one of them being the issue of preemption that my colleague, Mr. Darby, addressed thoroughly, and the other issue I want to bring to your attention is your favorable approval of this bill not only strengthens and improves the safety standard on the freight rail system, but it improves passenger and commuter rail service in the state of Maryland as well. Maryland has 700 plus miles of Class 1 railroad owned by either Norfolk Southern, CSX, or Amtrak. Much of that mainline service, east, west, and north, south, is shared with high-speed passenger and commuter trains, the trains that I have the luxury and my colleagues of operating each and every day at speeds now reaching up to 135 miles per hour. Your approval of this legislation markedly improves rail safety in the state of Maryland for both passenger and commuter rail. One of the issues that also I know this committee is addressing will be how you will allocate the resources that will come to the state of Maryland from the Investment, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act. We now have a federal partnership with the current administration where they are investing up to $66 billion in the expansion of passenger commuter rail. $36 billion of that will be competitive state grants that Maryland will be able to pursue based on the prerogatives of this body. I encourage that you, on behalf of the traveling public and individuals that will utilize the passenger commuter rail system going forward, you favorably approve and support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to questions. First question goes to Delegate Ruth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Delegate, for bringing this, Mr. Vice Chair, for bringing this bill back again, this important safety issue. And thank you to all of you for your testimony. I'm looking at the testimony, unfavorable testimony from Norfolk Southern Corporation, and they say that positive train control automatically stops a train to help prevent collisions, derailments, and other accidents that can be caused by human error, and that because of that, a second crew member is not needed. I think it was Tom that mentioned it in passing, but I wondered if someone could address that a little bit more in depth.
I could give you my personal opinion of it, but I'd rather read the opinion of the Federal Railroad Administration in regards to that. Under their proposed rulemaking, which is ongoing right now, the FRA said, and I quote, PTC systems do not completely perform all the functions of a conductor. Thus, while PTC is a safety overlay to help prevent certain accidents, FRA's PTC regulations do not include the requirements to perform crew member job functions, which are essential to prevent or mitigate other accidents. Also, PTC is not foolproof either. On January 20th of this year, MTA had to cancel 38 MARC trains because the PTC system would not connect properly. So with that, I'd say PTC does not replace a crew member.
So PTC is, first of all, is not just if I can make sure I understand, it's not a perfect technology, and it can fail. So that's one issue, and the other issue is it won't do all the functions that a second crew member can do. Am I understanding you correctly?
Correct. Actually, I have a list of 8 functions that a conductor does that PTC cannot do, and these are from the FRA. I can provide them to the committee.
That'd be great. Thank you so much.
Delegate Ruth, if I can, as an operating engineer that actually has to live with PTC like my colleague, Brother Cahill, I can validate what Mr. Casecamp says. It is not a foolproof system. It is to supplant. It is to supplement. It's not to supplant, but supplement the expertise, knowledge of the operating locomotive engineer. One of the issues that the rail carriers are very tempered about bringing to your attention is their desire to implement artificial intelligence, okay? To actually assume the function of an individual in the cab of a locomotive. And there are a Class 1 railroad indicated their desire to test an AI program where once the wheels of that locomotive starts moving, that the engineer will just become an attendant. It will literally run itself. And that inherently is a danger to the traveling public because of the knowledge, instincts, and experience that our operating engineers and the conductors have over the territory they operate and knowledge of the commodities in those trains. So while you're here, some conversation about PTC and some of the other technological innovations the industry is considering, none of them can supplant or replace the knowledge and expertise acquired over the length of a rail career.
That makes sense. I've heard the same types of things about airlines as well.
There you go.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill. Vice Chair Stein, I know it has come before in this committee many years, but this is my first year getting to have the fun of digging into it, so I appreciate that. I just would like to ask, and I think it may be directed to Larry, but anyone who knows the answer can answer it. We've had some great conversations with representatives on all sides of this issue, and I want to say I really appreciate that education from everyone. One of the things that I have the most concerns about based on those conversations, I'm hoping that you can alleviate, and that is the effects of this rule to our Baltimore ports, particularly to Trade Point Atlantic. You know, there are some folks who believe this is going to be very problematic for the growth of that industry. Looks like Delegate Stein is handing that one to you. So, yeah, if you could answer that, I would really appreciate that.
First off, Trade Point Atlantic has their own railroad, as you probably know, and it's not covered under this legislation. As far as the port goes, the important thing to remember is the collective bargaining agreements that are in place today require 2 persons on crews. And they're not, according to my conversations with the people who negotiate collective bargaining agreements, they're not in line to change them in any near future. And the other thing is, if they do decide to address crew size, they're not going to eliminate the second position. They may agree to it being a supplement to the train in a designed or a designated area, but where they'd be on the ground as opposed to sitting on the locomotive. But it still would be a 2-person crew.
Okay, so just to clarify, if I could, so you don't see any scenario where putting this into Maryland statute would actually decrease the competitiveness of the Port of Baltimore compared to other ports along the Eastern Shoreboard?
None whatsoever. The state can't is not going to change the collective bargaining agreement that requires 2 persons on the trains. The advantage to the Port of Baltimore is its location to destinations to the west. That's the advantage of the port. And the detriment to the Port of Baltimore is the Howard Street Tunnel, which doesn't allow them to run double stacked trains through the tunnel. And as you might remember, in 2017, CSX pulled out of that agreement. It was a public-private partnership to redo the tunnel to where it could handle double-stack trains, and they pulled out of that agreement. They're back in it now, and the tunnel's going forward to be accommodating double stacks, but that was a 6-year delay as a result of that. So I don't see any effect this legislation would have on the Port of Baltimore or Trade Point Atlantic for that matter.
Delegate, could I just follow up a little bit on that too? It's important to acknowledge as well that almost all freight trains around the country have 2-person crews. Maryland is not an anomaly in currently having 2-person crew requirement under the collective bargaining agreement. In fact, that is the norm. And also in the fiscal note, it does say that the port was unable in the past to determine the extent of possible impact and did not provide an update for this bill.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and I also appreciate your patience to educate me on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming. I just have a question for Mr. Darby right on the far left related to footnote 4 in the Indiana Railroad 2 case. This bill, in the first provision, it's limited to railroad freight that shares the same rail corridor as a high-speed passenger or commuter train, right?
Right.
Would you say that that provision is more related to safety or more related to economics?
No, I think it's pretty clear that that is related to safety. And you know, one thing I would say is obviously I've been practicing long enough, and we have, you know, nobody can stand up here and guarantee one way or the other what a court would do with this issue. But quite clearly under the Triple R Act of 1973, and you know there have been a lot of criticism that Larry Mann's testimony was submitted by Larry Casey Camp, and Larry Mann, just when you appreciate who he is when you read that. I mean, he's like the guru of railroad safety. He was in on writing the first Federal Rail Safety Act in 1970. And he talks about the various criticisms of applying that particular law that had a really narrow purpose, right? It was to get the freight rail system in those 17 states straightened out. And it accomplished that purpose. So there's a real question as to whether or not it's even necessary. But clearly, it addressed it from an economic perspective. This legislation is clearly limited to safety purposes. And understanding the interplay between freight rail and passenger rail that constantly goes on in the areas where there is a sharing of the right-of-way of the track, it clearly highlights, that issue. And even the Illinois case, as you pointed out in footnote 4, talks about leaving the door open for a safety-related bill.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that. And just same question for the sponsor, just to get on the record. Would you say that the limitation of the bill to sharing the corridor with high-speed rail and commuter is safety-related?
Yes.
Thank you.
Next question goes to Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Tom Cahill. If he could come up, please. And I appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask about this recent accident in Ohio. Was there a two-person crew in operation there?
So the Norfolk Southern train that derailed in Ohio was crewed by a two-man crew. While it was a terrible derailment, the benefit here was the best possible response in that situation was able to occur because of the two-man crew, because of the conductor being able to dismount, immediately assess what happened, have paperwork in hand to be able to hand to responding first authorities that showed exactly the order that the train cars were in, what each tank car, dangerous tank car, what the commodities were, how to respond to it with the emergency response guide, and also to be able to secure the portion of the train that was to be left where the derailed cars were, and to cut away the locomotives, to move the train crew to safety, and to just generally take hold and assess the immediate response needs of that bad derailment.
And do you happen to know what was the cause of that accident?
Everything is still speculative at this point. It looks to be that it was a burned off axle journal that caused the derailment, but these are things that the broader issue with the industry right now, the worst poison that's come into this industry in the almost 30 years I've been in it is this precision schedule railroading model where it's cut, and prioritize profits, prioritize train lengths, minimize running trains by maximizing train lengths and the commodities that these trains haul through our communities, and cutting with personnel, a 30% cut since 2017 across Class 1 railroads. This also leads to cuts in the car inspectors that physically inspect each of these cars at intervals as they travel throughout the country. And these are all the things that potentially could have led to this derailment. But again, the best possible outcome here occurred with the two-person crew. A single engineer up on that locomotive, there's no telling how much worse this could have possibly been because of miscommunication or the inability for the engineer to directly interact with the responding first authorities.
Delegate Haley, if I could amplify what my colleague, Mr. Cahill, mentioned, because the respective labor organizations that we are affiliated with have party status in the ongoing NTSB investigation, we are limited as to what we can say regarding this matter. But one of the things, and it's included in my written testimony, was that it was because that train was crewed with 3 members. They were able to immediately assess the situation and take action that minimized the additional risk and exposure to the residents of the Palestine community. And unfortunately, over 2,400 families are displaced right now, and they are not able to be in their homes in that community because of this derailment. And to bring this home for each of you members of the committee, imagine what would happen if this incident had been in Gaithersburg, or Rockville, or Easton, or La Plata, or the city of Baltimore. And as a locomotive engineer, along with Brother Cahill, we are required by federal law to remain in the cab of that locomotive. We cannot leave it. So unless we have the benefit of someone like Mr. Casecamp and the conductors who accompany those freight trains, we can't provide first responders with the necessary waybill and information they need to assess the situation and respond in a manner that will minimize the risk to the residents and neighborhoods of those respective communities. And as a matter of law, those commodities, some of the very same commodities that contributed to this incident in Ohio, are transported on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis through neighborhoods right here in the state of Maryland. So just imagine the ongoing risk that the communities adjacent to our rail corridors have, and you have an opportunity to prevent a major accident like this happening by your favorable approval of this legislation.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Douglas, I'm glad to see you did here 4 times because this is 1 for me. So, probably some silly, stupid questions. Your 2-person crew, relative to interstate commerce, when you have your neighboring states, do those states require 2-person crews also?
My understanding is, I mean, actually, if you don't mind, I'll answer and then defer to Mr. Casecamp. My understanding is that almost all freight trains operating in America today have 2-person crews on them.
Okay, so when the guy crosses West Virginia or Pennsylvania line, you don't have to stop to pick up a crew member or drop a crew member off?
I'll defer to.
No, sir. The collective bargaining agreements in place today require 2 persons on every freight train,
Okay.
99% of them.
Okay. Now, are most trains today autonomous?
No trains are autonomous.
None of them.
No trains are autonomous,
No,
okay.
none of them. No.
Is the safety, I mean, we're talking on this committee about self-driving vehicles and self-driving trucks. And then, you're going to be on the roads and, Lord only knows when you have a self-driving car or truck and a personally operated car or truck and how that's all going to interfere. But the trains basically stay on the tracks. Was there a future of seeing trains become autonomous in that respect?
Well, Delegate, the best response to that question is, to my knowledge, the only autonomous operated train in the world right now is an ore train in Australia, where the only thing there is armadillos, lizards, and other kind of things of that nature, where they move between the iron ore mine and the port where those commodities are shipped. Because of the loss of communication with that autonomous iron ore train, which is massive in and of itself, they have had to intentionally derail that train at least 2 times because they lost communication and could not stop it. So, and that's in a remote area. So to my knowledge, that is the only train in the world that is operated on the scale and scope of the freight trains that Brother Cahill and Brother Casecamp operate. And because of, all you need is one bad accident. Yeah. It may work 99% of the time, but that one incident is the issue. And to my knowledge, that is the only autonomously operated train, and it has failed miserably on multiple occasions. And I think it was even delayed in its deployment because the technology would not allow it to be safely done at the time.
Okay, my last question. You talk about a 2 or 3 mile long train. How does the engineer steer, drive?
You don't steer.
Okay, I know the train's going down the track. Okay, I got it. You don't derail. So what, in the case of that, you have two engineers in a 2 mile long train. Explain to me how that works.
I'm gonna defer to Brother Cahill because I have the luxury of operating a Ferrari every day because I run the high-speed Acela train and passenger equipment. So I'm gonna defer to Brother Cahill, but just for the purpose of not getting you in trouble in the future, you don't steer trains, you operate them, okay?
Thank you very much for clarification.
So, yes, some of the trains now do approach 3 miles long. It's not uncommon for my employer to run the, what we call the trailer trains, which are the container trains, which you would see come out of the Port of Baltimore. move across the country. Some of those trains are approaching 14, 15, 16,000 feet in length. They ran one south over the winter here. It was in Maryland, DC, and Virginia all at the same time as it moved south out of our region down into Virginia. Just 2 men on the head end. And now with the implementation of distributed power in this area, which are remotely controlled locomotives placed within the train at locations specific to the makeup of the train, everything controlled by the engineer on the head end. To correct you and educate you, no, it's not 2 engineers on the train. It's an engineer and a conductor that the conductor is specifically in charge of, as you've heard, making sure the engineer is complying with all the restrictions en route, all the restrictions based on the cars that we're carrying, the type of commodity we're carrying, and just to be there to make sure that if something happens or to prevent something from happening, they are there to act. It's something that this positive train control can't cover. It's for security reasons. Positive train control is not an autopilot. It's not a security thing. A rogue engineer or train crew could disable positive train control and go and wreak all kind of havoc. But as far as the grade you're talking about, yes, it's running a roller coaster. It takes the training and the diligence of the engineer to make sure that that train is getting from A to B and you don't know anything about it as the public.
Delegate Morgan, just to put a pin on that, I learned earlier today of an experiment to operate a 200-plus car train on the Northeast Corridor, the high-speed corridor I operate in. If that train were to have any kind of mechanical problems or issues with either locomotive or cars, it would literally shut down the Northeast Corridor between Wilmington, Delaware, and Baltimore, Maryland. That's the impact of it because of the length of the train and complexity and the time it would take Brother Case Camp or one of his members to walk that train, to inspect it, to determine the cause of that problem. You could have the most important and biggest rail corridor between Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia literally shut down between Baltimore and Wilmington. So the length of the trains and the complexities of them are causing problems. And now much of the rail infrastructure, both sidings and meet points, cannot even accommodate or handle the size of these behemoth freight trains. So they have to keep moving because they can't be stored safely in certain locations because those sidings were built with the expectations that train would be somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 feet. And now 10,000 to 15,000 is the industry standard now because of precision scheduled railroading, as Brother Cahill has already indicated.
Thank you.
And Delegate, I'm sorry, I do have one point to add. The types of accidents that we're talking about are not just the type of derailment that happened in Ohio because of a mechanical issue. Every year in the country, there are more than 2,000 grade crossing accidents. And that's where, train may engineer, staff and operated completely perfectly, but a car gets stuck crossing, crossing grade, tries to run to make in front of a train, and tragically gets hit. There are more than 2,000 of those across the country every year, resulting in hundreds of fatalities. Those, in addition to, again, the major accidents like in Ohio, not to downplay the seriousness of any grade crossing accident, but those are the types of emergencies that having that second person is so important for as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Stein, for bringing this bill again and for all of your testimony. I think I'm just a little more shocked by some of the other things you've said since then that make me really kind of afraid of the direction that we're going with, especially this precision schedule railroading. Is there some work on, I don't know if reducing that or lessening the impact of it or not allowing that in some way going on? Because it seems like that is also problematic. Or is that another?
Unfortunately, that's an operating policy of the railroads. We as a labor organization don't have any say in that. Now, Congress is looking at it.
Okay.
The Surface Transportation Board, I believe, and the FRA are looking at it.
Okay. I appreciate that. So that sort of came to my mind as I was listening to the others, but I just kind of want to go back to this because I think there's some thought or conversation that this is like doubling the two-man is, twice one-man crew. But it sounds like not too long ago, there were 5-man crews, and then went down to 3-man crew, or a 2-man crew, and then down to 2.
Yes, in my career, there was 5 persons when I hired on the railroad, went to 4, went to 3, and it's down to 2 now.
So is 2 enough?
Well, if I was negotiating a contract, I'd say no, but
Okay.
How about 2 is the minimum? Right.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I can't.
Technology has advanced. Train sizes have more than doubled from the era that Larry's talking about when he hired, where trains were average between 3,000 and 5,000 feet. Now we're talking, as I said, 10, 12, 13,000 feet. I know my carrier is regularly running 200-car coal trains to Baltimore that come in around 25,000 tons, in addition to other longer and heavier trains that are part of this precision scheduled railroading operating policy. And yes, to answer just top on your previous question, Marty Overman with the Surface Transportation Board is on top of this and aware of it, and has been doing what I see is good work to try and expose it. But the bottom line is it's a Wall Street backed initiative, and it's not good for this country, not good for public safety.
And I really appreciate you bringing it to our attention here. Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Chair, and Vice Chair Stein, thank you so much for sticking with this legislation and bringing it back. I think it's really important. I just would like someone to revisit very briefly this nexus around freight trains and passenger and commuter rail trains. In the other states where you have the two-man crew laws and then the many more, I guess, Vice Chair Stein, where similar bills are being contemplated, do they all have this language where it's only addressing where there are these shared corridors between freight and passenger rail? And I'm just curious if that's the case, why? Why do we not try to address where it's just freight trains and other, outside of these commuter corridors?
Delegate, I'd say there's 8 other states that have laws on the books. I don't think any of the 8 states have the limited restriction to just where they share tracks with passenger trains. Most of them are flat out 2-person crew on every train.
Okay, so then to the second part of my question, then why limit it in Maryland? Or is that as far as we think we can take this? I just, because I see an argument for it being the whole way around. Maybe Vice Chair Stein wants to answer that.
Well, I was here when the initial legislation was proposed, and that was an amendment put on by the Senate Finance Committee.
Delegate Stein, do you understand why I'm asking what I'm asking and what so is it more of a political, I guess, maybe?
I guess the answer is yes, but also, to make completely clear the nexus between safety and the proposed bill, because since we're saying only those situations where a freight train shares tracks with passenger or commuter rail trains, to make there's certainly a nexus with safety where a freight train doesn't share track with a passenger train, but by limiting the bill to tracks shared with those passenger trains, it makes 100% clear it's all about safety.
Okay.
Delegate, if I could, I think one of the issues that could kind of amplify and maybe better explain it is because so much of the east-west, north-south rail network in Maryland interface with the passenger rail corridor, and that in and of itself creates a special situation in the state of Maryland that some states don't really have because they have very limited or limited commuter or passenger rail activity. So I do think that that was one of the considerations also. And I do think that to make certain that the economic argument that has prevailed at times regarding this legislation did not dominate the conversation, that's why this provision may have been added in the earlier versions of the legislation, so that any of the public and the members of this body could see that it was clearly a safety issue and not underpinned by any economic considerations.
Okay, that helps. I just think of scenarios in other parts of the state and where a, freight train is passing through a small community and where an accident, could occur, would occur, and would be harmful to the community, to the residents, maybe passing right through the center of the business district and doing harm there. And where there's no passenger train involved at all, but there's still a potential for a lot of damage, injury.
Next year's
death.
bill.
Okay. So then my second question is around.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There we go.
Okay. Last question, Mr. Chair, is around the penalty language of the first offense being $500 and subsequent offenses within 3 years, $1,000. Who would be fined? What parties? What are we talking about? Who would be actually cited and fined?
Well, the railroad would be.
I'm sorry.
The railroad.
The railroad. That's what I was figuring, and
Corporation would be fined.
I'm just a little bit surprised at, frankly, how low those fines are, given that you're talking about railroad companies, that you'd be talking about $500. That seems, and I know subsequent fines are higher, but that just seems like such a small amount considering the parties we're talking about. Just an observation.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All righty, it appears that is the last question for the proponents of the bill. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to the opponents of the bill. Randy No, Lydia McPherson, and Brian Hammack.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Brian, I guess, do you want to go first?
Happy to. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, and Brian Hammack, Director of State Affairs for CSX Transportation in Maryland. CSX's rail network is an essential part of our national supply chain. We span over 20,000 miles, connecting 70 ports to nearly 2/3 of the nation's population. Safety is a paramount concern on the railroad. Railroads are the safest, most environmentally friendly mode of ground-based transportation. And CSX is proud to be an industry leader on safety. Since 2019, we have led the industry with the fewest FRA reportable train accidents and lowest average FRA reportable injury rates. Despite what the USA Today headline that was mentioned earlier, railroads are much safer and the safest that they've ever been. I don't want to miss the opportunity to highlight the $466 million Howard Street Tunnel project. I know members of this committee have been very supportive of that through the years. We have shovels in the ground, work is being done, and we expect to supply double stack container service to the Port of Baltimore by the end of 2025. On crew size, I'm going to highlight a couple points. One, this can be a confusing issue. On the one hand, we're considering a state law mandating two-person crews. On the other hand, the proponents are telling you that we currently have two-person crews, that collective bargaining agreements require us to have two-person crews into the future, and that there are not plans to move to two-person to less than two-person crews in the immediate future. So the question is, what does this bill need it for? If bargaining agreements already require it, and at least for CSX, we're not currently bargaining on this issue. And we're really talking about what's the policy moving forward in the state. We think that this is an issue because of its history in collective bargaining and the sensitivities around our national supply chain, that this is an issue to be left for collective bargaining. And I'm also happy to answer questions about the MARC contract, which is in my written testimony. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Who would like to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Randy Noy. I am Assistant Vice President, Regulatory Affairs for Norfolk Southern Corporation. As I said in my written testimony, I believe that federal law would preempt House Bill 352. I noted 3 separate statutes in my written testimony, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus on one, the Regional Rail Reorganization Act, also known as the 3R Act. Preemption under the 3R Act is extremely clear. No state within the region covered by the Act, and Maryland is one of them, can adopt a law requiring any railroad to employ any specified number of persons to perform any particular task, function, or operation. Now, the state of Illinois put this statute to the test very recently when it enacted a crew size law in 2019. And like Maryland, Illinois is within the region covered by the Act. And after the crew size law was enacted, it was challenged in court. And in a decision published in December of 2021, the federal judge that heard the challenge said the preemption language of the 3R Act is too specific to ignore, and it held that the Illinois crew size law was preempted. And the judge specifically addressed some of the arguments that the proponents made, this notion that somehow the 3R Act is now a dead letter because it's outlived its usefulness, or that there's some sort of a distinction between a crew size law addressing economic issues versus safety issues. And the judge said, none of that stuff is in the statute. And you can't, in this day and age, try to get into the heads of legislatures and figure out what they were thinking. You look at the words of the statute, and the statute is just very clear. So while I've cited other bases in my written testimony for preemption, there's just no getting around the 3R Act for a state like Maryland within the region covered by the Act. The statute is just that clear, and I would encourage an unfavorable report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Lydia McPherson. Lydia, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you. So my name is Lydia McPherson. I'm the Regional Government Relations Manager for Norfolk Southern. And I just want to take the opportunity to kind of expand upon some safety data that's relevant to this issue. Crew size mandates like the one being proposed by this bill reduce the rail industry's ability to innovate and compete with no empirical evidence of safety benefits. In fact, in 2019, the industry's federal safety regulators stated that, quote, accident and incident data do not support a train crew staffing regulation. U.S. has continually and gradually reduced crew sizes over the past few decades from the 5-person crews that were utilized and prevalent in the 1970s to the 2-person crews utilized by most U.S. freight railroads today. In that same time period, accident rates fell by more than 80%, and today more than 99.9% of all hazardous material that travels on rail makes it to a destination without incident. These improvements can be attributed to a focus on safety culture and continuous advancements in technology, such as positive train control, which was mentioned earlier. Maryland actually recognized the potential benefits of similar emerging technologies in trucks back in 2016 when MDOT applied for a federal grant to test autonomous vehicles on portions of the I-95 corridor. Many European countries have safely operated with single-person crews since the 1930s. In fact, today more than 95% of European rail traffic is moved by one-person crews. Even though Europe has a more complex rail network than the U.S., a 2021 study found that their operations appear to suffer no reduction in crew-related safety. As the industry makes further investments in new technologies, we can expect to see a continued improvement in safety just as we have over the past 50 years. However, staffing mandates can significantly hinder this type of innovation. Additionally, we believe this problem is covered under federal preemption, which my colleague went over. And with that, I will leave it up to the committee for questions.
Okay, we have a number of
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for coming. I just have a few questions for Mr. It's Noy, right?
Correct.
Okay, great. So just as a bit of a disclaimer, I am an attorney, but a terrible one. You're no doubt better. And so I have several questions. I think you can probably answer them yes or no, but just to help me clarify, I understand kind of like this maze of law surrounding it, surrounding the preemption issue specifically. Okay, so in 2021, this Illinois Federal District Court in Indiana Railroad 2, because they had to go back to it after the whole 9th Circuit, 7th Circuit thing, right? They struck down the Illinois two-man crew law, correct?
Correct.
And that law was not identical to this law, though, right? It was a little broader.
Correct. There's certainly a distinction, but I would say it's a distinction without a difference. I mean, the way that the 3R Act is constructed, it doesn't allow for even a more narrow crew size law like Maryland's.
Okay. And then just for the benefit of the committee, obviously, the lawyers will know, but the precedent from the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois does not bind Maryland. Right?
That is true.
Right. And you mentioned that there's no way to get around the 3R Act language, which I get the argument. But New Jersey and Massachusetts both have two-man crew laws, right?
That is true.
And they have not been invalidated. Right?
They've not been challenged as far as I know.
They have not been challenged. They've not been validated. And they are in that same region that's defined in the 3R Act that Maryland's also included in and that Illinois is included in.
Correct. And the judge in the Illinois case, the Indiana Railroad case, did note that in a footnote. But it didn't persuade him not to invalidate the Maryland law or the Illinois law.
Could you explain what the judge talked about in footnote 4? In Indiana
let
Railroad.
me pull out the case.
In Indiana Railroad 2.
I have to say that I'm a recovering lawyer. I don't really practice anymore.
Okay.
So I'll do my best here.
Okay.
It did seem that the judge was a little puzzled by the fact that those laws weren't challenged, but he pointed to the fact that there was a slightly different mechanism in those states that would allow a railroad company, I think, to reduce crew size below 2, provided that they could make some sort of a safety case. And I think he speculated that perhaps that's why those laws weren't challenged in those states.
Right. So he said that there was a way around the 3R Act preemption if you could essentially have some sort of safety carve-out. In other words, if your law was more narrow than the one he was striking down in Illinois, for a safety reason, then there was a way you could survive 3R Act preemption, and he speculated that's why Massachusetts and New Jersey have survived, right?
That's not how I read that footnote. I read that footnote to say that's why those laws were never challenged.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, he did say it was the key litigation preventing difference.
In other words, why they didn't why they didn't litigate.
Right, why they didn't litigate. Right. But obviously, if folks thought they would prevail, they would have probably litigated by now because those laws were passed a long time ago, right?
You know, I can't get into the heads of what folks were deciding back in Maryland or rather Massachusetts and New Jersey.
Right. But there's at least a possibility, since those survived, that this law would also survive, both challenge and being struck down.
I will say this. I'm aware of no case where a state crew size law was challenged under the 3R Act that didn't hold that the 3R Act preempted the state law.
Right. But there's only one case total, right? Or two. There's one in West Virginia, is that right? There are two?
West Virginia, and there were a couple in Indiana.
Okay. And then the 3R Act sets up like its own court, right? The Regional Rail Reorganization Court, is that right?
The 3R Act did create, but that court has since been disbanded, I believe.
Right, but they did have an opinion in 1994, and I know that the Illinois judge did not find this super persuasive. I disagree. I don't necessarily think that every judge would agree with him, but it is true that that court, before it disbanded, the reorganization court created by the Act, did say that if a law was safety related that dealt with crew sizes, it was not preempted under the 3R Act, and that was by the court created by the 3R Act. That's right.
There was that language. It was dicta. It wasn't central to the holding of the case. But I don't dispute that language was there. But the issue was, that may be how courts thought about cases 30, 40 years ago. It's no longer how federal courts think about cases. I mean, the Supreme Court has said, you can't try to get into the heads of the legislature. You have to actually take them at their word and look at the words of the statute. And the words of the 3R Act just don't allow for that sort of distinction between economic and safety rules.
I think it's certainly true that there's been a more textualist bent on the Supreme Court, but this was not appealed to the Seventh Circuit, right? The Illinois case, and the Fourth Circuit has also not taken it up. And those courts and other cases, including cases from this previous year in 2022, have actually not uniformly adopted a hardcore textualist approach to statutory construction. Is that right?
Well, I would say this. I think it's telling that the state of Illinois did not appeal to the Seventh Circuit.
Sure. But I mean, the Seventh Circuit and the Fourth Circuit, would it be fair to say, have somewhat different political makeups as well?
I really can't comment on that.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it. Thanks.
All that was done, Delegate Davis, so that you would feel at home in our committee. Next question goes to Delegate Ziegler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have two questions. The first is very quick. Is there any limit to how long a train can be?
Under federal law,
Or any law, or is it just a matter of your best judgment?
I'm not aware of any train length restriction in law.
So the other thing I wanted to ask is that Delegate Stein and his panel talked about how useful it was to have 3 people on the train in the Ohio accident. And I'm sure from a public relations standpoint, you're grateful too. But do you disagree that it was helpful, that in fact they were able to do things that perhaps saved lives or certainly minimized damage?
So the accident in East Palestine is under investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board. We are parties to that investigation. And I really can't comment on anything to do with the cause of the accident or what factors there may have been involved in mitigating. But I will say this much. First of all, we've been very responsive in East Palestine. Norfolk Southern's been on the ground since the date of the derailment on February 3rd. We are working actively with government officials, state and local officials, to help the community recover, and we will continue to be there until that is accomplished. Let me also say this. There was some testimony earlier about the FRA's proposed regulation on crew size, which would cover this very subject matter. The FRA, when it did its regulatory impact analysis, was not able to quantify any benefit, the type of benefit that you're talking about. And that's why they scored their benefit when they did their cost-benefit analysis at a 0. They said that those types of benefits were just too speculative to even be considered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Hammock from CSX. If I understood your testimony was that, and I apologize, I missed part of this hearing because I was in another hearing in another committee. My understanding from your testimony was that this law is not needed because collective bargaining agreements already require that there be a 2-person crew in your trains. Is that correct?
It is true that collective bargaining agreements require 2-person crews in the train. I think my testimony was trying to highlight some of the confusion around the issue of if there is a bargaining agreement in place that requires 2-person crew, why does the state law need it to impose a mandate on 2-person crews? And I was trying to sort of broaden the focus here for years in the future, which is, why the law is being presented here is in the future, if collective bargaining agreements are amended to allow for a lower crew size, then Maryland wants to have it locked in place at 2023 operations. So I was bringing up that point just to sort of highlight is the law needed or not? And if it's under collective bargaining agreement, it's protected by collective bargaining agreement. If the FRA is occupying this space with rulemaking, then really we should let those processes play out. Let the federal government rule on matters of interstate commerce. So we're under one umbrella of regulation instead of a patchwork of state regulation on the issue.
And isn't it true that collective bargaining agreements don't last into perpetuity?
Correct.
Okay, so they do have an expiration, is that correct?
Correct.
And so they are rebargained at some point. And isn't it also true, as we have seen recently, that sometimes the collective bargaining process doesn't work and an agreement isn't reached? Isn't that so?
I don't want to say the collective bargaining agreement doesn't ever work because I believe in the process. I think it works.
Well, I do too.
It's always sometimes it's a bumpy road, but it works.
But isn't it so that sometimes there is not a collective bargaining agreement agreement reached on a collective bargaining contract.
That's true.
That is correct, right? So if there is, if we do get to a point where, I hope not, because I hope we always have collective bargaining agreements in place in our railroad industry for safety and other reasons. But if we did get to the point where there was no agreement on a collective bargaining agreement, collective bargaining fell apart, would your company then continue the two-person cab policy?
Our current policy is that we operate with 2 persons in the cab, and that's what our vision is for, you know, the immediate and near future. There's not a plan for CSX. There's 5 major railroads in the country. We often bargain together. We sometimes carve out issues separately. Crew size is one of those issues that's carved out separately. And for CSX currently, that is not an issue that we have on the table or are looking to put on the table.
Okay, so it's your intention to continue the two-person policy with or without a collective bargaining agreement. And so I guess I don't understand, and maybe you can explain to me why you would be against this law that would require what you're doing already.
Well, I guess I'd ask the question back is, what's the purpose of the law if we already have it in place? So I think it brings up the issue of, and to answer the question, in the future, is if there is a collective bargaining agreement that allows for a less than a 2-person crew, Maryland wants to have that locked in at 2 persons. And the issue with that is that if our neighboring states do not adopt the same regulation, then Maryland becomes an island unto itself that has higher logistics costs than the Port of Norfolk or the Port of Philadelphia or New York, and it hurts our competitiveness at the port. It creates a scenario where under this future, you know, non-collective bargaining agreement, single-person crew, where you'd stop trains at the state line to pick up an additional crew member. That's why this is a matter of federal issue. The FRA is occupying this space. They're going to be thoughtful in their approach and reviewing the types of commodities we move, the lengths of trains, the you know, the areas that we traverse in, not just passenger rail, but through dense population locations to highly sensitive, you know, areas like the Capitol. We operate trains, you know, close to the Capitol in DC. So I think they'll be more broad and maybe more detailed in the review of that process.
Okay, well, thank you for that, but my question was more, and I think you answered it, my question was more about the non-permanent nature of the policy you have in place now, and I think you answered it, that the policy could change going forward. So thank you for that, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The Vice Chair has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for Mr. No, and first I want to start off by saying I sympathize. I'm a recovering attorney as well. But
We should join a support group.
Yes, definitely. But
You are. It's called the General Assembly.
that's true. I guess my particular question was, have you had a chance to read the Maryland Attorney General's office letter on preemption?
I did see that.
Okay, and you understand that they significantly disagree with your assessment?
Well, I mean, I guess they
disagree with your assessment.
They hold out some hope that a court that would review this case would see this distinction between an economic and a safety rule. And that's the very sort of reasoning that was rejected by the Illinois court in the Indiana Railroad case.
And their reasoning is also the same reasoning that they've held to for several years when this legislation has been considered under multiple scenarios concerning litigation and law. Isn't that true?
I agree that their minds appear not to have been changed by the 2021 decision.
It's always fascinating to hear this. There appear to be no further questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 352. We will now move to House Bill, the next one, which is House Bill 353, and then after that 391, both by Delegate Healy. Oh my, 16. Delegate Healy,
Good afternoon.
good afternoon.
I bring before you House Bill 353. For the record, I'm Delegate Ann Healy, and I thank you for the opportunity to present this bill about traffic control monitoring systems authorization. This is enabling legislation. And this is not exactly a reintroduction of the bill I had in last year. I withdrew that bill and worked on it and addressed some of the issues that were raised last year. But what this bill does is it enables local agencies and the state agencies to install and use traffic control monitoring devices to capture and record an image of a motor vehicle violating certain traffic laws, such as stop signs, do not enter, one way, no turn, no left turn, no right turn. They could basically put a camera on the sign, the stop sign or the do not enter sign, and take a picture like they do with speed cameras or with the traffic light cameras that we have. This is modeled on it's the $40 fine. It's not the $75 fine. It's the one that goes with the speed cameras. But the legislation is really to do two things. One is to make it possible for the local governments to control their roadways without having to place police officers on the street monitoring and stopping cars along the way. It will reduce, possibly, if it is enacted by the local governments, interactions with police that are not really necessary and that we have seen in the past and recent times, very recent times, traffic situations that can quickly balloon into something really violent. We have this whole problem with, and I'm going to, Tyree Nichols and Philando Castillo and many other people of color who have been killed as a result of interactions over traffic stops. And so this is a way to avoid these traffic stops by having a camera do the enforcement and still have the safety of the stop signs and so forth. I have in my written testimony from one of my constituents who lives on a street where there have been repeated problems with stop sign running that have caused severe accidents. Somebody getting hit on the sidewalk because somebody ran a stop sign and lost control of their vehicle, and other things that happen over and over again because people ignore the stop signs. The only thing that the police can do is sit there, and they can't do it every day because the cost of having a police car on that road every day, year-round, is impossible. So it's a safety issue for the people who live in these communities. It's also a safety issue for the driving public. And just one small statistic, the New York Times documented that over 400 cases over 5 years in which U.S. police officers pulled over and killed motorists who were unarmed and not in pursuit of for a violent crime. They noted that many stops began as common traffic violations. And that's why I hope that we can get this bill passed this year for two good reasons. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I believe Sarah Sample is signed up in favor of the bill. Why don't we have you come up and testify, and then we'll entertain questions. Sarah, is this your first time in our committee?
Second time, I believe.
Okay. Forgive me for forgetting.
Wasn't that memorable, huh?
It will be now.
Well, we'll see. So thank you, everyone, for having me. Again, I'm Sarah Sample. I'm here from Maryland Association of Counties, and we are here in support of House Bill 353.
And so, like the delegate has just said, this is an authorizing bill that would give us the ability to place traffic monitoring systems on our roadways. And so one of the things that I really want to point out is that this certainly does help make our neighborhoods safer by being able to monitor these violations with these automated systems, and then that is what changes the behavior of the motor vehicle operators. And the change in the behavior is really the biggest thing. We're trying to limit the behavior, the violations, as much as possible. So it's super important for us. But what I would also say is give a little bit of context. It's definitely about keeping the drivers safe, keeping them safe from each other, but also we've seen an explosion in pedestrian traffic in the last couple of years. I think gas prices is certainly something that affects that. I think people are just also trying to be environmentally conscious. But I think it's certainly evidenced by the way this industry has evolved. You see bike shares, scooter shares, Vespa shares now. People who are altering hoverboards, actually. I've got a nephew he's got a device he can put on the hoverboard that basically turns it into a go-kart. And when he's on it, if you're in the car, the rearview mirror cannot see him at all. So the landscape in terms of pedestrian safety has absolutely changed. So I think that's just incredibly important to point out when it comes to being able to do what I was saying before, which is to change the behavior, limit the violations. And that limiting the violations also limits the fines. And so that's the Maryland Association of Counties' perspective on this. We certainly urge a favorable report on House Bill 353. And so with that, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Healy. I appreciate your concern about safety. Would you be open to changing this to something that 9 other states are doing, and that is applying countermeasures, like flashing lights around the stop signs or the yield sign to really flag for the driver that these things are there, rather than adding cameras?
It's interesting that you should say that, because the street where my constituent who wrote these stories about things that happened in the last, those stop signs have those lights, flashing lights on them already, and people don't stop. So it doesn't seem to be working.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Delegate Healy, where's the money go? I've been reading, trying to scan.
I'm sorry, I can't hear what you said.
Where do the fines go?
The same way that they do for the other devices, the cameras and such. They go for public safety, transportation safety in the local communities.
So they would go directly to either the county or the municipality where the
right, but can only be used for certain purposes, and those purposes would be either for public safety or for traffic safety.
Thank you.
Any other questions for? Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, thank you. And this is, again, I'm Delegate Ann Healy, asking for a favorable support for House Bill 391. House Bill 391 is also a bill that was before us last year that I did withdraw and work on because the hearings last year raised some questions, and I think that it's in much better shape right now. What the bill does is it changes when you get a ticket, and well, let me just tell you the story. I have constituents, and it was a handicap tag was stolen and then used on another car that was left in a parking garage, just abandoned there. And the license plate was reported stolen, and it was reported to the MVA, so it was taken off of the MVA. There were no flags on it or anything, but the traffic ticket itself started to accrue costs because the person who got the ticket knew that they had reported it stolen, and they didn't think that they needed to worry about it until all of a sudden these multiple charges for paying it late, but they didn't pay it, and they didn't get a chance to go to court because they didn't realize their limited time, and they didn't realize they needed to. So this bill tries to address that by putting a box on the tickets that says the license plate doesn't match the car. And that's so that if the person checks that, they don't have to go to court. All that has to happen is that somebody reviewing the ticket can verify. They can contact MVA and say, no, that's not the car that goes with that license plate. And that will help a handicapped person who has a hard time with mobility anyway, having to go to court for something that somebody stole. And this should never have happened in the first place, but this, I think, will remedy the situation. That's the bill. I hope you can support it.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? I have a question. Oh, wait a minute. Delegate Terraza has a question. We'll go to you first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just, is this only for handicap tags?
No.
So
If your tag is stolen, and like this situation, it's misused, and you get and that, and under normal circumstances, the police report or would have made a difference. But in this case, in Prince George's County, it didn't, because the police officer wrote it down instead of being stolen as being lost, and because they had a different category for treating that, and it got very convoluted. This would make it very simple, that just a person could say, this isn't my car. I'm not responsible for it being left somewhere.
yeah, I appreciate what you're trying to solve. I'm just not sure I understand how it works. So is this only if police officers are writing tickets? Because I guess
No, that was one of the issues with the bill from last year that I got rid of. So so because it isn't police officers, as you know, it's people who write tickets don't have police powers. There may be some places where they do, but where they use police officers. But in general, it's some kind of other person designated by the local government to take care of writing tickets. So they don't have access to the MVA information. So if it's put on the ticket, then it avoids tying up the courts, because they could just verify it. They could designate somebody, the local government could designate somebody to review these tickets. There won't be very many of them, but it will help really and not tie up the court time or the people's time.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I have a quick question, Delegate. I noticed that MML testified against. Have you read their testimony, and do you have a response to it?
I don't remember if I've read theirs or not. I don't think so. I didn't read it. No, I haven't read it yet.
Well, then you can't
We'll
have a response.
look at it in subcommittee.
Okay, sounds good. Any further questions for Delegate Healy? Seeing none, that ends the public hearing on House Bill 391. Is Delegate Charkoudian with us? Apparently not. So we will go to House Bill 519. Delegate Jones is with us, and we'll get back to Lorig later on. So Delegate Jones, welcome back to the committee.
Thank you.
And you have 4 minutes when you start.
Okay. I apologize. I thought I was coming early. Let me just get to you. Thank you so much, Chair Barve, Vice Chair Stein, and members of the Environmental and Transportation Committee. I come before you today to reintroduce HB 519, which would help create safer and more consistent transit policies. Current Maryland law forbids bicycles on sidewalks as the default statewide. However, localities can and have overridden this law for safety and other reasons. Unfortunately, this has inadvertently created inconsistency throughout Maryland for cyclists. In many areas of our state, roads will switch between state, county, and city roads a number of times, leading to confusion for those commuting by bike. As many of you know, I represent the capital city, and so it's city, county, state, county, city, all over the place. If this law was consistent throughout the state, not only would those commuting by bike be safer, but it would also help avoid confusion on which laws to follow when traveling across jurisdictions. All of this, of course, is compounded by the safety issues for bicyclists sharing our major roads with vehicles. And recently in my district, I know throughout many of your districts you have had the same, we had a horrible accident where I lost a constituent who was commuting to work or home from work on a bicycle and was unfortunately not only struck, but then was killed by his injuries. This bill would amend state law to say that unless disallowed by local ordinance, a person may ride a bicycle on a sidewalk or sidewalk area with a caveat that riders shall proceed in a safe manner yielding to pedestrians. As many of you know, localities throughout the state have already enacted similar local bills, including Montgomery, Howard, and Arundel County, as well as the capital city here in Annapolis. Implementing this more consistent policy around bicycle usage will add to safety for bikers, help reduce traffic and accidental violence to cyclists, better routes to schools for our children, and address transportation disparities. It can help ensure that Marylanders have access to safer, more sustainable, and affordable transportation methods. I respectfully urge a favorable report on this simple, consistent bill for all of Marylanders. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delegate. Who would like to go next? John? Okay.
Thank you. John Corrin, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County. I also chair the...
Oh, sorry. Now it's working. There we go. Now it's working.
Okay. Thank you. John Corrin, Bicycle Advocates for Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, also chair the County Bike Commission here. There is no better way to relieve traffic congestion, protect our environment, promote public health, and provide affordable and equitable transportation options than to make it safe for people to get out of their cars and onto their feet or onto bikes. But we know they won't do it unless it's safe to do so. And in many, many places in Maryland, there are no safe choices other than a sidewalk. Anne Arundel County passed a bill here enabling this about 1.5 years ago, unanimous bipartisan support from our county council. Good transportation policy aligns 4 things: safe behavior, actual behavior, enforcement behavior, and the law. And in most cases, we're passing a law to try to change behavior. In this case, it's the law that's out of alignment with the actual practice, safe practice, and enforcement practice. And no police officer is going to cite somebody for biking on a sidewalk, nor should they be able to, unless they're doing it irresponsibly and threatening pedestrians. And this bill will allow for that circumstance. So I ask for a favorable report on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
Hello, I'm Kurt Riegel, representing both the Annapolis Transportation Board and I guess the Bicycle Commission for Anne Arundel County. The idea is very simple. A good transportation system is diverse and resilient, supporting all modes of transportation, one of which is bicycles. The state of Maryland is one of only 5 states in the country which declares, in a sense, open hostility to bicycles by declaring in state law that the default setting for bicycles on sidewalks is you can't do it. It's against the law unless overridden by local jurisdictions. So that's only 5. The rest of the states are either actively supportive of using the only infrastructure that exists in most cases, bicycles, for bicycle sidewalks, or is silent on the subject, or has the situation the exact reverse of what Maryland does. In most states where there is anything resembling a prohibition, the default is set allowed unless forbidden by local jurisdictions. And that's what this bill would do. We think this properly sets incentives. It will encourage the wider use of bicycles. It will increase bicycle safety. Right now, the default setting of Maryland law is that children and elderly people must ride in heavily trafficked roads rather than on sidewalks, which we think doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I commend favorable consideration of this bill. I think it will have us join a distinguished groups of most states that already do this.
And I guess you're the cleanup batter, Josh.
All right, pretty exciting. My name is Joshua Feldmark. Chairman Barve, Vice Chair Stein, members of the committee. It's great to be back here in front of this committee. I'm here representing Bike Maryland. We have a little over 18,000 members, and he represents cyclists of all kinds, from the road warriors, which, as you can tell by my physique, I clearly am, to the recreational, to the commuter cyclists. And what I want you to do when you think about this bill is close your eyes and think about your favorite child. If you have more than one, you have to pick one. Roughly 10 years old. This bill is for them because when they're riding their bike to school or to their friend's house or whatever kids do these days, then they don't, it's not safe for them to be on the road. The sidewalk is where they belong. And so, as you've heard before, what this does is it just simply says bikes are allowed on sidewalks unless the local jurisdiction says otherwise. And so it takes no control away from the local jurisdictions. They still have the ability to restrict access and do it in ways, for example, the way Howard County has done it, which is to say bikes are allowed on sidewalks, but not on Main Street, Ellicott City. So if you've got a particular area of town or a local boardwalk or whatever it is, and your local jurisdiction wants to restrict it there, they have absolute authority to do that. And this will just, generally speaking, make it safer for those cyclists that are less safe when they're on the road.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, when I was about 5 years old, I was riding on my bicycle 65 years ago.
Was it one of those bikes with the big wheel in the front and the little one in the back?
Believe it or not, it was after that. But I was riding on the sidewalk, not a soul on the sidewalk, a side street in beautiful downtown Rock Hall. And the chief of police took my bicycle.
Oh.
I still cry about it now and then.
So you should.
That's horrible.
That is horrible.
Never did give it back. But it was for riding on the sidewalk. So, obviously, in my later years, I intentionally ride on the sidewalk, hoping that the police will stop me. But they haven't. But anyhow, in a more serious note, I'm looking at the portion of the legislation that deals with the penalty part of it. So I'm thinking back when I was 5 years old, how I would pay this fine that you have. I guess it's on page 2. Page 2 of the fiscal note. It talks about the violation for the above restrictions and what the maximum fine would be $500, the prepayment was $70. I mean, how would this be administered to a child, say, not necessarily 5, maybe 12, or 14?
I'll start.
Yeah, you can start.
I guess my initial response would be the current state of affairs is that applies to children across the state of Maryland, except in the handful of counties and cities that have already allowed it. And so this bill would at least, drastically narrow it down to those that elected to prohibit. So I don't know all the details how the fines work, but it certainly would restrict the number of children who would be violating Maryland law if this bill were to pass.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how it would be implemented to the children? That's
this-
kind of my question.
Well, obviously, this bill would reduce the amount drastically that would happen, because the default in Maryland would be that it would be allowed. So compared to what we're doing now, that would reduce it. And I'm thrilled to hear your understanding of how important this is, Delegate Jacobs, especially with the something that still sticks with you all these, maybe 12 years later from when you were younger. I appreciate that.
Exactly.
So this would reduce it drastically compared to what we're dealing with now.
Well, that would certainly be the hope, and I, applaud the concept, but I'm just, for the rebellious ones out there that ride where
Right.
they're not supposed to.
And that is a maximum, sir. That's
Yeah,
the
but
maximum.
I'm just wondering if it's a 12-year-old child, how that penalty would work. You're gonna,
We can follow up offline.
okay, thank you.
Delegate Jacobs, so did you give your bicycle a name or anything? Delegate Siliberti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On a lighter note, if my colleague can go back to the time he was 5 years old and still have a memory of it, I salute him. I salute him. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too have a story. No, when I was a teenager, before I got my driver's license, we used to ride bikes everywhere, and I was riding with my younger stepbrother, and he got ahead of me, and he got run off the road by a car, and he was okay, he was hurt, but not badly, and by the time I got up to him, someone had found him and rescued him. And to this day, I'm scared of riding bikes on the road. But I actually just wanted to follow up because I'm a little confused after Delegate Jacobs' question. So you're not adding penalties, is that correct? Those penalties are in the current law?
Correct.
Okay. I just wanted to, I got a little confused. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I think someone should contact the mayor of Rock Hall, Maryland.
I agree.
If we can get some reparations here, maybe, I don't know, the statute of limitations maybe hasn't run, police misconduct. I don't know. All sorts of ideas are I'm outraged. I've already written a petition. Yeah. Okay. So this bill is not limited by age, right? It's just period. Okay. Because I know that in New York and in San Francisco, I've lived in New York for a little while, and I remember the rule there was 13 and older could not ride on the sidewalk, but 13 and younger could ride on the sidewalk. But y'all are not contemplating something like that.
None of that. No.
This is not age restricted. I will say that there are some towns that have implemented age restricted, like permitting it for children under a certain age. There are some small Maryland towns have done that. And again, they would still have the authority to do that under this bill.
But Frank, you go.
Oh, sorry. If we, in my opinion, and again, this is now the work of the committee, but in all due respect, in addressing transportation disparities, I wasn't necessarily looking to put an age restriction on it.
Yeah. And I guess to play devil's advocate, the reason for those age restrictions is I think twofold, but tell me why these concerns are overblown, right? I think number one, that pedestrians can feel imperiled by cyclists, right? And that's why I think for example, DC allows bikes on sidewalks outside of downtown DC, but not in the center core. And then number two, that you can actually sometimes increase unsafe situations at intersections, where if a cyclist is in a sidewalk, they are not seen by a motorist, but then when they traverse from a sidewalk into the intersection, sometimes that can actually sort of have these like deadly, pernicious effects. That's my understanding of why those sorts of restrictions have existed in the past. I know when Montgomery County was considering this, these are the kinds of things that they were thinking about. Tell me why we as the committee should not be concerned about either the fears or the comfort level of pedestrians or the fear or the comfort level of cyclists at intersections.
The point that I would like to make in response to your excellent devil's advocacy is that it's definitely true. There are some sidewalks for which the use of bicycles is entirely inappropriate. We recognize that. We think the decision authority best capable of making those decisions and in making the fine tuning for age and whatever is the local authority, not the state. And that's why we propose in this legislation reversing the default from forbidden unless permitted to permitted unless forbidden.
I'll add that the concern about conflicts between cyclists and pedestrians came up when we introduced a bill here in Anne Arundel County. We went and checked with both Montgomery County, who I think has allowed it for 15, 20 years or so, Howard County at least 10 years. We checked with both counties, and there were no reports of issues or concerns, and that allayed the concerns here in Anne Arundel, and it passed unanimously.
And if I may, you bring up DC, and DC's downtown infrastructure for cyclists. Well, that's a different game altogether now, isn't it, right? I mean, it's tremendous and it's wonderful. I'd also like to add that 19 states already allow bikes on sidewalks, and an additional 8 allow it except, just like this piece of legislation, where prohibited by localities. So the majority of states do.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, yeah. If you want to go, Josh. Okay.
No, well covered.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any further questions before we leave this bill? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the public hearing on House Bill 519. I understand that Delegate Charkoudian is going to be late, so her bill's going to go last. We're going to go to House Bill 545, Delegate Hartman. And you have somebody with you, don't you?
Yes, I do, Melanie Purcell.
Okay.
And Rich Hutchinson, who is the promoter of the event.
Okay. Welcome back to the committee, sir. You have 4 minutes.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you. It's great to be back here. Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, honorable members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Wayne Hartman, presenting House Bill 545, which is titled Vehicle Laws, Annual Vehicle Shows, Motor and Trailer Homes. I will say the bill was recently amended. I believe the committee has a copy of that amendment. The amendment's kind of simple because of my strive for inclusivity and equity. We eliminated all the classes of motorhomes and RV trailers and struck that language. So it was very confusing, the different classes, so we eliminated that. So that's and eliminated the portion of the bill that allowed used vehicles. So when we're talking about the bill, understand that. This bill allows motorhome and RV dealers to participate in more than 2 shows annually. Right now, state law would limit a dealer and their salespeople to only 2 shows. And it also would allow out-of-state dealers to participate in a Maryland show. That it also requires that the out-of-state dealer, their salespeople, would be go through whatever regulation or licensing authority in their own state. So the bill has statewide benefit. It allows Maryland dealers, as I said, increased shows. So when they participate in more shows, the hope is that there's additional sales for them and additional revenue for the state. This benefits the Ocean City Convention Center in the area through allowing us to create a show. It's going to generate room nights. It's going to generate more tourism meals related to those tourists. And as you know, the Ocean City Convention Center is a partnership with the state of Maryland. So it's going to make the Ocean City Convention Center more successful and make that partnership more successful. There is no loss, but it's a gain to the state. So if an out-of-state dealer came to the state and had a sale, when that vehicle or trailer is registered in the state of Maryland, they're going to pay Maryland sales tax. So by having additional people there, different salespeople, it only makes the show bigger and more successful. There is a need for this. For many people here, the 95 corridor is their main route of transportation. On the shore, we're, it's Route 13 and 113 is our corridor, and that takes us quickly into Delaware and quickly into Virginia. So the reason why I say there's a need right now for the Ocean City Convention Center, for a local person there, to buy an RV, the closest in-state dealer is 74 miles away. As a matter of fact, the 10 Maryland dealers that sell RVs, it's 106 miles on average for me to get to one of those Maryland dealers. So the likelihood of me buying from a Delaware or Virginia dealer is likely, because like when you buy a new vehicle, you take that vehicle in for service, you want something close and convenient for warranty work, service. RVs, we're talking about winterization and all those types of things. So there really is a need. The other thing with having the show and allowing out-of-state dealers, it's going to allow more options for those people. It's going to allow brands to be represented that Maryland dealers don't currently represent. I'm sure many of you heard of Airstream, the silver bullet-looking travel trailers, very desirable brand. That's my understanding is that's not available through a Maryland dealer, such as many other brands that we commonly see when we're traveling on the road. So with that, I ask for a favorable recommendation on House Bill 545, and I'll turn it over to Melanie Purcell.
Okay, Melanie, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Environment and Transportation Committee. My name is Melanie Purcell. I'm the Director of Tourism and Economic Development for Worcester County, of course, where Ocean City is, and I'm respectfully asking for your support of HB 545. Worcester County is home to about 54,000 residents. However, we host nearly 8 million guests per year. Travel and tourism is critical in driving our economy, growth, employment. I mean, we really rely very heavily on this industry. And in Maryland as a whole. Maryland is has a very strong tourism industry. Over the past 3 years, we've seen a tremendous shift in travelers' choices, interests, and values when it comes to making a vacation decision. Outdoor recreation, adventure, and unique, authentic experiences have become a priority. We're truly blessed to have so many of these assets in our region, and as a result, we have recovered quite quickly from the pandemic. In fact, the state of Maryland's at about 90% in terms of looking at our tourism tax code in terms of recovery. In that arena, with outdoor recreation, of course, the RV and van life travel has become even more attractive and popular. According to 2022 KOA camping report of RV ownership, it's increased by 62% just in the last 20 years. With an array of camping experiences in Maryland, from the mountains to the beaches, we want to be able to cater to these travelers. As a result, Ocean City has planned an RV show in the newly expanded convention center, as Delegate Hartman referenced. However, the success of the show may be diminished due to lack of participation from dealers outside Maryland. As we discussed, currently the law does not allow outside dealers. In addition, only 2 shows per year. Again, variety of products. The newly expanded convention center has a lot to offer, and we feel that this would be a reasonable change, allowing these out-of-state RV dealers to showcase and sell products at a Maryland event. So I respectfully ask for your support of HB 545.
Terrific. Next, we'll hear from Rich Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brave and members of the committee. The internet has created a new normal with the way consumers are researching new RVs and automobiles. We are now only a click away from purchasing an automobile on Google. Though many sales are still done the traditional way, the influence of the internet has led many to not only shop online, but also do their research prior to making a purchase. This can also result in not only a faster transaction, but also a more educated customer. RV shows are the best place to allow customers to physically look at lots of options in one location. However, Maryland does not have all manufacturers accounted for in their dealerships to be able to display in shows. Airstream, Scamp, Oliver, ATC, Road Trek, to name a few, and another 45 manufacturers in surrounding other states. Currently, the closest RV dealership are located in Delaware. 6 of the top 10 closest dealerships are less than 45 miles from Ocean City. The closest Maryland licensed dealer is BOE RV. They are 74 miles away. and they're the only Eastern Shore, Maryland dealership. The remaining dealers are 90 to 140 miles from Ocean City. Adding a show in Worcester County for Maryland dealers increases their opportunities for a show in October. Many tourists and across the state, Maryland dealers will have new opportunities to reach Maryland customers as well as out-of-state customers. Anyone who wants to purchase an RV from a dealer at our show will not be leaving with an RV. The final sale and paperwork will take place at the dealership to ensure laws are followed. This is similar to those purchasing vehicles out of state. The dealer, whether in or out of state, the process, Maryland taxes are collected.
Thank you very much. We have a number of questions. I believe that's everybody who signed up in favor of the bill. So the first question goes to Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate. Thanks for bringing this bill. Couple of questions. Have you had a chance to see MDOT's letter of information?
Yes, I have.
Okay. They talk about concerns about consumer protections and the inability to, since these dealers aren't required to comply with Maryland law, MDOT would have no ability to enforce their rules on out-of-state dealers. How would you respond to that?
Well, there's a few ways. First of all, the dealers that are coming, as it's noted in the testimony, they're salespeople. Those dealers are bonded, and there's other things. The deal, as Mr. Hutchinson said, it would be actually done in their state. So they're displaying right now. Our understanding of Maryland law is that a dealer can't even set up at the show and just display. So, you know, they would be perfectly content with just having the ability to display there and let people know the options. Another thing that was talked about today when meeting with some of the opponents of the bill is possibly looking into something with the MBA to create a temporary license or something like that where they can be temporarily licensed. But as I said, we really don't see the need for that. They're content with just displaying the ability to display and actually conduct the sale in their state.
Okay, now I'm confused. If you're content with them just being able to display, then do you need an amendment to what you have?
We do. Right now, our understanding of Maryland law is an out-of-state dealer cannot display at a Maryland show.
Okay, so you would strike the portion about being able to sell and it would just be a display?
The promoter of the show would be content with that, yes.
So is that something you'll provide to the committee?
If it's an amendment that, you know, you feel is necessary to make it pass, would be happy to do that. But, you know, keep in mind, the dealers in the other states are, you know, they have their own sets of regulations, and it's not the same as Maryland. But we'd be happy to offer that as a friendly amendment, whereas it allows them to display. Right now, that's something that they can't do, according to the folks at the MBA that Mr. Hutchinson spoke with.
Got it. Mr. Chair, may I have another question? Yeah. Thank you. And actually, you led right into my second question, which was, do you know if any of the surrounding states, Delaware in particular, have any type of reciprocity so that Maryland dealers could go to Delaware and do the same thing?
I'd love to be able to control the state legislature in other states, but I don't think we're that our little Power Ranger pins don't go over the state line. I'm not aware of that. You know, it's kind of unique with the rural nature of the lower shore. Ocean City is the most densely populated area, and it's the only convention center that's, you know, within a good distance. This is the first RV show that Ocean City is trying to have. There hasn't been any on the Eastern Shore. So this is kind of new, and unfortunately, we can't give that reciprocal ability.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Shake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to wrap my head around 2 shows a year. That's all that's permitted by state law. That's what you're saying.
That is correct. For some reason, Maryland decided to limit the ability for Maryland businesses to conduct more than 2 shows. So right now, this weekend, there's the Timonium show, and then I understand there are, you know, other shows. you know, if they participate in Timonium and one other show, then they'd be excluded from this. So, you know, that's a huge hindrance to Maryland RV dealers.
I know boat shows they're allowed more than two in the state. That's why I just find it strange that RVs are limited to two. So
DNR is a little nicer than the MVA in that regard.
So, what would be the revenue advantage for Maryland if you were only doing display only in Ocean City, say, you know, now under this new amended scenario? I mean, certainly we want to benefit Maryland, and we don't want anything to be detrimental. So, where's the benefit, and how does this benefit Maryland?
Sure. Well, it's going to benefit twofold. It's going to benefit all the Maryland dealers by allowing them more shows. But take for granted if the dealer from West Virginia, the furthest one away, 145 miles, comes to the show, which we certainly encourage. You know, on a weekend in October when the show is going to take place, there's, you know, many tourists, but yet they're not going to be in the beach in October. You and the missus are riding down the highway and say, honey, there's an RV show. You know, we talked about getting there. We're going to take a look at it. It's going to increase the opportunity of sales for those Maryland dealers that come. You know, so somebody's there from Pennsylvania or Frederick. As we know, Pennsylvania borders, you know, parts of Western Maryland. So it's going to benefit the Maryland dealers by coming to the show and able to increase their sales. It's going to benefit Maryland in the fact that by us creating those opportunities and showcasing the recreational vehicles, as it generates more sales across the board, whether it's from an out-of-state dealer or an in-state dealer, they still, when they register that vehicle, are going to pay the sales tax. So it's going to increase the registration fees. It's going to increase the sales tax. So it's a win-win for Maryland dealers as well as the state of Maryland for revenue as a whole. If you look at the fiscal note, it clearly shows that. It's one of the few times I'm in agreement with the fiscal note.
So is there any studies that you know of? I know Assateague has a lot of campers, RVs down there, which is right next to Ocean City. Do we know of the amount of Maryland tagged vehicles versus out of state? Is there any information?
Nothing I'm aware of.
Yeah, there's about, just within 60-mile radius of Ocean City, there's about 20 campgrounds. We could certainly get that information, yeah.
It was an off-the-cuff question. It's not, you know, that pertinent to the bill. I'm just trying to figure out why the law is the way it is on RVs. Thank you.
Next, Vice Chair has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Delegate, thanks for bringing this bill. So just so I'm clear, so this, in the end, would be an out-of-state sale. Is that right? I mean, they would just, the out-of-state RV dealers would be able to display their vehicles in one of these Maryland shows, but then the actual transaction would be back at the dealership's home out of state. Is that right?
If necessary, we would be content with that if that would minimize the objections to the bill. Of course, it would be nice for them to be able to collect a deposit. And, you know, when you're buying a motorhome or something, it's always contingent on the test drive. Just like at the boat show, if you put a deposit on the boat, you really haven't bought it.
Wait, I think you said the opposite of what you intended. Did you say that you'd be content to have it be an out-of-state sale or an in-state sale?
No, we would be content if to eliminate the objection to the bill, that if, you know, they were able to display there. Right now, as I said during the testimony, our understanding is that an out-of-state dealer can't even bring their RVs and showcase them. If that would be, you know, an amendment that's required by us, a friendly amendment, to make this more palatable to the opposition, we'd be willing to do that. And then, you know, the sale would be conducted back 11 miles away from the convention center at Frankfort, Delaware, or whatever. You know, 74 miles is the closest Maryland dealer. So if you look at the proximity, 11 miles, 23 miles, 29 miles, you know, that's the distance some of these Delaware dealers. And that's truly what the locals, you know, somebody like myself who lives there, you know, that would be the dealerships we would be using. But you buy that vehicle out of state. I could buy a vehicle in Montana and bring it back. For me to put tags on it, Maryland tags, I need to pay the Maryland revenue, the Maryland tax, the Maryland title. So no matter where this deal happens, the revenue is coming back to Maryland for the Maryland resident.
Okay, but if I could follow up, Mr. Chairman. And so if someone, so this would be, you're saying under your proposed amendment or possible amendment, this would be an out-of-state sale. So I guess if a consumer had a complaint against the dealer for something in connection with a transaction, they would have to look to Delaware, for
If
example.
that's where they purchased it, yes.
If that's where they purchase it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for bringing this bill. Another shameless plug this weekend, Maryland State Fairgrounds in my district, District 40CB. I noticed that you also get in free if you're active or veteran military with your ID. So in addition to knowing that, I'm looking at the different brands, and it looks like this is where they're all going, right? I mean, they go to the state fair for this show. Most of the RV vendors. I mean, there are over 85 different brands that are apparently the most popular. I don't have any problem with your explanation of why we need to increase the number of shows that folks could do. Because if you guys start having a great show over in Ocean City, it's going to pull folks from our show in Timonium. So that makes sense to me. The part that I can't really wrap my head around is the lack of reciprocity between Maryland dealers and dealers from other states. And it really does seem like even if we do get the tax money from the tax, which I hear you, our dealers don't benefit from it at all. And they actually are the ones that are going to be hurt by a bill like this. So did you consider, or would you consider possibly limiting the dealers to those that only have things like Airstream that are not available in Maryland, or some other way to try to equalize the reciprocity issue, because it is very concerning.
Well, when we talk about different things, like where we're discussing the minimum wage bill and everything, we talk about the proximity of Delaware and Virginia, and that being our competition. And, you know, living on the other side of the bridge, as I mentioned, the 95 corridor is your main, you know, we talk about the 95 corridor. For us on the Eastern Shore, it's the 13 and 113 corridor. So if I'm going to buy as a local, you know, I understand, I try to buy in Maryland and so forth, but there are no options for us. There truly are no options. 106 miles away is the average RV dealer from the Ocean City Convention Center. So I'm going to be buying from that out-of-state dealer whether this bill passes or not when I want an RV. This is promoting the RV industry. It's bringing awareness to it. It's just adding another opportunity for those. And those, we're certainly welcoming those Maryland dealers, and Maryland dealers are expressing interest in being there. So,
Okay.
and
That
when we
actually
have when we have that tourist, you know, that lives closer to that dealer, I think it's a proximity issue. I mean, if you go to an automobile show and they have Fords there, you're going to look at that Ford and say, you know what, I really like that Ford, but you're going to go back and buy it from your local Ford dealer. You're not going to buy it from a dealer 100 miles away because it's going to be really a pain to get serviced, you know, for warranty and so forth. So it's just, you know what I mean? It's,
Yeah, no, you're making perfect sense. So I appreciate that answer. I guess maybe it makes more sense for a local bill. I don't know if that was a consideration, because you're going to draw from a lot of other states if you're doing this in Western Maryland, or even we're going to start dealing with Pennsylvania and people from Virginia and West Virginia, you know, in my area. You know, I'm just throwing out ideas to help make this work, but I definitely think letting them have more shows is a great idea. There may be a little more work in my mind on how to actually make it functional for our dealers and not let them suffer through it.
Let me follow up on Delegate Guyton's question. She asked specifically if you'd considered the idea of limiting this to brands that don't have dealers in Maryland, and you didn't address that.
You may be able to address that better, Rich. There's some overlap sometimes, though. So there are, you know, here's a list of manufacturers that aren't represented. But let's say, for example, Airstream's not represented, but we bring an Airstream dealer and they have something that is represented, such as, you know, Gulfstream. You understand what I'm saying?
No, actually, I don't. I think that, I mean, are they like car dealerships where they sell different types of cars? How does that industry work?
Well, I think I can add to that. I mean, even just in Maryland right now with your Maryland dealers.
Yeah.
Winnebago, for instance.
Okay.
you got 4 dealers in Maryland that are Winnebago dealers.
Okay.
If not, probably more, but that's just off the top of my head. But I know there's at least 4 Maryland dealers that are Winnebagos. So if I do go to an out-of-state dealer, which our closest Airstream dealer is in Virginia, that dealer may have Winnebago. I mean, it would be difficult for me to restrict another dealer that's a multiple line dealer.
Okay.
When you got Maryland dealers that are multiple line dealers also. But again, I mean, like he said, I mean, if you got people, like we're in a tourist area and you got people coming from multiple states, they're gonna buy from what's closest to them, you know, whether they're on the Eastern Shore or not, because we're drawing people in that are not from the Eastern Shore mostly because we're in a vacational territory. So we want those other dealers, the Maryland dealers from up north. I want all the Maryland dealers there. They have first rights to everything in the dealer if they come. That's what I want.
Mr. Chair, if I can say, usually, like you go to a car dealer, it's a Ford dealer. Boats and RVs are a little different. A dealer usually has several different offerings. That's why I say that would complicate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for my own benefit, Delegate, is there any current restriction on the number of shows that Maryland dealers can attend?
Yes, 2. And that's where we're trying to change with this bill. We're trying to open that up so that they can participate in more shows and be more successful and add to the tax revenue for the state.
Okay, thank you.
Almost hit it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Herman, am I supposed to say that? Thank you for this bill. I have several questions too. First and foremost, one of our colleagues mentioned, have you considered making this a local bill? It seems to apply specifically to your location.
Sure. So if, when we say a local bill, if we make this a Worcester County bill, allowing the Ocean City Convention Center, I'd be more than happy with that. Certainly would offer that as a friendly amendment.
Okay. And also, do you know why it was limited in the past to 2 shows?
I don't know. I believe motorcycles were similar, and in 2017, before my time here, but I believe that was changed in 2017 to allow for motorcycle shows.
Did they limit the number of shows still?
They were, but we took that restriction. We lifted that with a bill in 2017.
Your county?
No, statewide.
Statewide?
Yes.
Okay. Have you considered not 2, but 4 shows? Or putting a cap on it? Right now, there's no cap.
Well, there's 2. The bill would remove that cap.
And without a cap, you could have 15.
Participating at, sure, but it would be up to the dealer as to how many they want. I mean, if you see a value in capping it at 4 or something, then we could discuss that.
Okay. And there's one other important part of the bill where used motorhomes and Class C trailers were not allowed at the shows, and so you opening this up.
We've stricken that. The amendment that I had generated has stricken used language altogether.
So you can't bring used?
No, there would be no used offerings.
Okay. I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you very much. We're going to turn to the opponents of the bill, and they would be Jim Doyle, Travis Martz, and Gregory Merkel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jim, your dad was one of my favorite lobbyists back in the day.
Well, I hope, back in the day, I hope some of that rubbed off.
Who'd like to go first?
I'll start, Mr. Chair. Jim Doyle here on behalf of the Maryland Recreational Vehicle Dealers Association. The main objection to this bill, of course, is that it permits out-of-state, Maryland unlicensed RV dealers to come into the state and sell RVs just as if they were a Maryland dealer. And on the other hand, as been mentioned here today, there is no reciprocity. The Maryland dealers who have complied with all the laws, paid all the fees, paid the fees for their salesmen, done everything else that's required under consumer protection laws in Maryland, have done all that, they would not be permitted to go to any of the surrounding states unless they became licensed in those states. And we think it's only fair that the same rule applies to out-of-state dealers who wish to come into Maryland. The other point that I would like to make is that, you know, if you go down this road on eroding regulatory codes, which really are enacted for the protection of the consumer, there really is no end to it. So I'm an attorney. If I were an attorney that was, say, licensed in Delaware, I guess I could come in here and say, you know, I'm licensed in Delaware. Why should I be subject to supervision and licensing by the Maryland Supreme Court? I shouldn't have to do both. Or as a lobbyist, why should I, if I'm a lobbyist in another state, why should I have to comply with regulation and registration by the Maryland Ethics Commission? Or if I had a home improvement business, the same thing. You can go down this road and there'll be no end to it. Any person that's licensed out of state anywhere can come in and make the same claim that he shouldn't have to be licensed here. So the only other thing in closing is I would read the second or the third paragraph of the MVA letter concerning consumer protection and how that will be impacted by this bill. Thank you.
Next.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee, Travis Martz, a reluctantly practicing attorney on behalf of the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association. In the fall, the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association expanded our membership base to include franchised motorcycle dealers, franchised RV dealers, franchised power sport dealers. So RV dealers would in fact fall underneath our membership category. I also want to give another shameless plug that we do also run the Maryland Auto Show in Baltimore City from March 10th to the 12th, where we are allowed to host all of those vehicle models that I just mentioned earlier. But I do want to be clear that we are very serious about licensing. We've always been very serious about licensing in the state of Maryland, whether being a dealer license or a salesman's license. The Maryland Motor Vehicle Administration has extremely stringent standards in regards to becoming a licensed individual in the state. And this strikes me a little similar to what we did years ago with Tesla, in a good way. And things that I think the committee can look at when dissecting this legislation. Tesla wanted to come in and they didn't want to have any dealers, but they wanted to sell their inventory in the state of Maryland. And because they didn't feel the capacity or the need to have an actual dealership location. And so we were able to work out an agreement with them specifically saying, if you don't already have and this goes into your questions about if a franchise is already represented in Maryland. If you don't already have a franchise represented in Maryland, as in you don't already have a Ford dealer, you don't already have a Toyota dealer, and you'd like to sell, and you sell electric vehicles only, then you can have a location in Maryland, but you still need to get licensed as a dealer. You still need to get licensed as a salesperson. So I can see a similar caveat here, so long as the individuals from the other states are getting licensed as salespeople at the same time.
Yeah, I'm Greg Merkel. I'm president of Leo's Vacation Center and also belong on the board of the Maryland RV Dealers Association, which puts on the two Maryland shows currently. We operate under the MDOT's rules. You know, we pay all the fees. We're held accountable for our salespeople. We're held accountable for turning in the tax money in a timely manner. And if not, we're fined. We're also submitted to audits by MDOT for our business actions and our financials with them. And we are not allowed, as a dealership, we are not allowed to go to Delaware and show our goods or participate in a show unless we have a location in Delaware and a license in Delaware, using that one state as an example. So if I open it up, I think you're just going to, you know, create a carnival effect where by not limiting the amount of shows, you're going to devalue the show. The example they use for motorcycles, since they've deregulated the motorcycles where they can have more shows than two, the motorcycle shows have really gotten the attendances down, the quality of shows down. It's really negatively affected the motorcycle shows and the local dealers. I think it's putting the Maryland dealers that pay the taxes and support the state in a disadvantage for no gain for the Maryland residents.
All right, thank you very much. We have a number of questions. The first one goes to Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What would you all, you answered one of my questions about the show, so thank you for that. What would you all say to the discussion that we had earlier about making it just display only? Do you still have the same objections, or what do you think about that?
Well, keep going. A display only, I mean, when we go to the show, the way the MDOT rules are wrote, we can only take a deposit on a vehicle. So we are displaying them. We cannot sell them or deliver them at the show. We have to do it back at our place of business. So, we are really just displaying. So that doing it differently for somebody else wouldn't make any difference.
I'd also add that, in terms of when you say display, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Does that mean you just have a field with vehicles sitting there? Or does it mean that you have vehicles sitting there and you have salespeople that are coming up and urging people to buy? Does that mean that those salespeople are making representations about the vehicles? Will make arrangements about deposits and down payments? Those are things that are all regulated now by Maryland law. So when you say display, I'm really not sure what that encompasses. I think, again, I'd go back to what is the main point of the regulatory process to begin with, and that is the protection of the consumer. And there are many of them in the transportation article relating to vehicle sales. As MDOT has clearly said in its letter, once you eliminate the authority of MDOT and MVA over these dealers because they are not licensed in Maryland, you've essentially cut the legs out from the ability of MVA and MDOT to regulate any of these consumer protections, whether they're at a display or a show or whatever you want to call it. So that's my reaction to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I may have this. So I'm looking at the consumer protection. So when there's a show now, it's put on by Boyce Cars and Show. And I have these different brands there. And Delegate Healy decides she wants to buy the brand. She buys the brand. She can take care of all of the paperwork, the titling, the registration there, correct? No. You just put a deposit.
Correct.
Even if it's an in-state company. Okay, fair enough. And then after the deposit is put down, then what happens?
Then you have to you have to finalize the sale at the dealership on their property where they're franchised and licensed and take delivery.
Okay.
And finish the process, the finance and the payment.
And so that also is the same process for an out-of-state. Yeah, this is confusing me.
So what we did, do you mind?
No.
So what we did a few years ago with motorcycle dealers, because of the Ocean City Motorcycle Show, is an extremely popular event. We allowed motorcycle dealers that are licensed in the state of Maryland to send their licensed salespeople to the Ocean City Show to consummate a sale.
Okay.
So they didn't have to go, at that point, wherever the person was, didn't have to go back to Annapolis,
Okay.
Harley-Davidson.
I think that's where I'm somewhat going, but go ahead. Go ahead, keep going.
So with the Maryland Auto Show up in Baltimore, which is primarily passenger cars and trucks and a lot of electric vehicles, most of the inventory there is supplied by the manufacturers. So the manufacturers' reps are there, and there's not any selling going on. Some dealers, if the manufacturers don't want to participate, will have their inventory there, but they will not consummate the sale at that off-state location.
Okay, I think you answered my question. 'Cause
Okay.
so like, this is like kind of like a capitalist, kind of like, I should be able to, in some regards, buy something that I like and that I can afford, even if, unfortunately, it may be mainstream, but not in Maryland. So I get that. And I guess I'm wondering if I am a dealer, is there an ability for me to get a stock of something? For instance, the brand doesn't exist here, but you could potentially sell the brand, right, on behalf of someone else so that the consumer could potentially get the product. Because it seems weird to me that, like, you can't somehow buy something that is just not available in the state. And how do you manage essentially the ability to sell to somebody who may want something that you don't have? Do you partner with someone and then you sell it on their behalf? I mean, that's kind of where I'm a little stuck.
Right, so the dealers, every dealer, it's very odd. This committee knows it from years ago, and now it's over in Economic Matters, but every motor vehicle dealer has a franchise agreement with the manufacturer.
Okay.
And the manufacturer is not going to let everybody sell their vehicles.
That's sure.
So to their point earlier, and the proponent's point that, some manufacturers, for whatever reason, choose that they don't want to have a dealer in the state of Maryland. They don't think this market is fertile enough for them for whatever reason. And I agree, that shouldn't be any type of that shouldn't be any way to inhibit somebody locally to be able to acquire that vehicle. But that's I'm not sure if I'm answering your question exactly.
I don't know. I'm so confused right now. And you couldn't, if you were out of state, and Mr. Chair, I'm finished after this, I promise. And to your point earlier about, you said that folks who were dealers and licensed went to certain shows in order to kind of finalize those sales, rather than them having to go back to the actual.
Or they just do it online now. I mean, we're talking about licensing laws that were created 60 years ago.
Do they need to be updated?
Well, I mean,
allow
if you're not,
something like this.
I mean, our Motor Vehicle Administration actually allows all documentation to be done online. I mean, we take electronic signatures. We're very forward thinking in that regard. So those are certain things. Those are certainly things that those who are putting on these shows can think about. And going back to the question about display, you could certainly display a vehicle if that was permitted, and then transact.
Yeah, but I can't buy it if I want it.
And then transact it online.
Full transaction online, licensing and titling as well?
In Maryland, you can.
For something that was
in other states,
out of state being displayed.
Yeah, in other states do not have that capacity, but in Maryland you can.
This is so complicated, but thank you so much.
Before I recognize the next person, I have a couple of questions, and I think maybe I want to direct these at Mr. Merkel, but I'm not sure. So let's say my wife and I wanted to buy an RV, and let's not talk about these shows. Let's say there's an RV dealership in Gaithersburg, for example. So we would go up there. Typically, do they let you drive the vehicle the way a car dealer lets you drive a car? What's involved in buying an RV? Because I've never done that.
Buying an RV is similar to buying a car, but it's kind of like buying your vacation rental and your car and everything rolled into one. If it's a motor home, of course, we do test drives, just like you would a car. If you're buying a trailer that requires a hitch and additional braking, then that gets a little bit more involved.
All right, now let's make the scenario I go to one of these shows, and I see a motorhome that I like, Is it typical to be able to test drive it? Or, I'm sure everybody goes on the inside, but is it typical for people to
At the
test drive?
shows, you cannot test drive at the RV shows.
Okay.
There's no provision, you can touch it, feel it, you can put a deposit on it and schedule a test drive back on the dealer's lot.
Okay, so in a way, it's not that much better. It's a little better than looking at these things on the internet because you can actually go inside of it and see what the inside is like in person.
You can touch it, you can look at, like in the show in Timonium, there's like 300 and some RVs of all different sorts, and there's 6 or 8 dealers representing those, 300 some units.
Okay.
Different dealerships.
And these dealers are only Maryland
They
dealers?
are licensed
Licensed-
Maryland dealers, and we have to put on the show, we have to get a permission letter from MDOT.
Okay.
And they look at the dealer's dealer number, and they also cross-reference it with the tax man to make sure nobody has any red flags, because if you have red flags for taxes, you don't go to the show.
Okay, final question here. Is there such a thing, let's say there's an RV dealer in York, Pennsylvania, and he or she wants to be able to sell to Maryland residents. Is there a thing in the law that allows them to be licensed in Maryland for Maryland consumers?
No, the consumer would have to go to Pennsylvania, purchase it, and it would fall under Pennsylvania, I guess, laws and regulations. Maryland would have no participation.
Or they'd have to have a location here in Maryland and have that registered.
And a license.
Yes,
They would have to have a location and a license.
Yes, there's nothing to prevent Delaware, Pennsylvania, any state dealers from coming to Maryland and going through the process and getting a Maryland license. There's no restriction against that.
No.
Okay, next question goes to Delegate Healy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the information here. That's very helpful. It's along the same lines as the chairman's questions. Is there like partnerships or franchises that are in multiple states? So you might have, I know in the car dealers, I mean, you know that Fitzgerald's got dealerships in Florida, they got dealerships in Maryland, and I'm sure, other companies do the same thing in different states. Is that also in the RV world?
But we're franchised in Maryland. If I had dealerships in other states, I could be franchised there as well. But they go state by state. You don't have multi-state franchises. You could have, but I mean, you have to be licensed and franchised in Maryland to do business in Maryland.
So I'm just thinking about if this dealership in York, Pennsylvania had also had a dealership in Maryland, but it was farther away from the people who live in that part of Maryland, okay? So, way down in southern Maryland, and the closest one would be in York. Could they buy it or could they go to the dealer in York, Pennsylvania, and through your partnership or agreement with another?
No, we have no
store?
reciprocity with other states.
It's not, I'm not asking about other states, I'm asking about your business arrangement with other dealers. Okay, so that's a non-starter.
That's not a thing.
That doesn't exist. Okay. We're all trying to learn about this. The last question I have is, would any of you be interested or withdraw your opposition if this were just a local bill related to the Ocean City Convention Center because of the distances to other dealers in Maryland? That's just a question. I want to know what you all think about that.
Well, speaking on behalf of the RV dealers, I would say we would still oppose it because we would still have the same, first off, reciprocity problem. That would not be cured by making it a local bill. We still would not have the ability to go to Delaware to sell RVs. And secondly, again, the consumer protection issue still remains. So all of the consumer protections that exist under Maryland law would not be subject to enforcement by MDOT in that particular county.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Just one question. We talked earlier about the fact there's only 2 shows in Maryland, and there's been some discussion of increasing that number. What number would you feel comfortable with if it wasn't 2? Or do you want to keep it at 2? I mean, that 2 seems kind of like really a low number for a whole year for RV sales in Maryland, but I'm just curious what you would feel comfortable with, or would you rather?
Yeah, I'll just speak to the history of the history very briefly of the off-site sales in general. The reason that the 2 came about is because of our licensing structure and having to have every salesperson licensed and go through a background check. The Motor Vehicle Administration basically said they don't have the investigators. If you had 15 shows hypothetically going on, and you had 15 car shows and 15 motorcycle shows, and it was all staff of salespeople, the Motor Vehicle Administration doesn't have the infantry to go out and verify that all of those salespeople are in fact licensed. There were times where those shows would go on and people would bring in sales teams from Florida, and they didn't have licenses, and that was a real problem. So the reason that I think it's for at least on the auto dealer, motorcycle dealer side, I can't speak to RV as much because they're just new. It's a new category for us. It hasn't been an issue. Nobody's actively trying to get more than 2 shows, really. But also they've got locations. We've got locations all over the state, so there's not as much of as a need for shows as well. But again, the 2 was in regard to the MVA being able to make sure that all of the salespeople were licensed.
So you really would not want to change it from 2? Is that what basically you're saying?
I have no need right now.
That's what I would. The more shows, the more diluted they are.
So 2.
The quality shows, or if the more you have, the less the quality.
So you're not interested in increasing it from 2?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming. I'm still just trying to wrap my head around this, honestly. So this consumer protection issue, and I read the opinion from MDOT about the consumer protection stuff, is concerning to me. Maryland has a lemon law for RVs. We don't?
Not for the RVs.
Not for. I know that RVs are not under the Maryland lemon law, but apparently we have something.
You do.
It's a separate lemon law that just applies to RVs. Is that right?
It's not called a lemon law.
Oh, okay. It's not called lemon. Okay, I got it. What is it called? What is it called?
It's a consumer. I mean, if you have,
Okay.
if the consumer has a problem with the product or the dealer, they have plenty of avenues.
Right. And it looks like, and sorry, okay, I won't call it a lemon law, but this consumer protection law that applies to new RVs that you purchase if they're defective. It appears that Maryland actually has one of the strongest ones in the country. And it's similar to Pennsylvania's law, but that Delaware and West Virginia and Virginia have weaker laws of this type.
I would agree.
Okay, so my question is, if an out-of-state dealer from Virginia comes in and they're not licensed in Maryland, and they come in and I purchase an RV for them, which of these consumer protection laws would apply to the purchase?
From the dealer you bought it, the state you bought it in.
So I would get the weaker Virginia version of the, okay, all right, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. That ends the public hearing on House Bill 545. Let's now turn to House Bill 367, finally, Delegate Charkoudian.
Thank you for your flexibility.
Yeah,
to
no,
other
it's, hey,
hearings.
we're busy people, I
I
understand.
know. Well, you all are busy people here.
It's like the anti-UN.
And I know you've been waiting all afternoon, so here I am. Mr. Chair,
With bated breath and everything.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Welcome to the committee. You have
you.
4 minutes.
Thank you. For the record, Delegate Lorig Charkoudian here asking for a favorable report on 367, and I have brought up my in-person panel. We have some folks online, I think, waiting as well. So I understand you heard essentially a small part of this bill already, which is the possibility of adding stoplight cameras to stop signs, which is what this bill is. And I appreciate the delegate for bringing that bill. But this bill tries to add some additional components to it. I thought it was a really good opportunity, and I won't repeat the reasons to have the stop sign, the cameras at stop signs, as pedestrian safety and otherwise. But I saw this as a really good opportunity to also add and test and experiment with some really important changes to our fines and our structures of justice around civil fines. And so what this bill does is it does what is called in Europe, and is very common in Europe, is called day fines, but it's essentially a sliding scale fine. And the thought process behind that is we want our civil fines that are tied to traffic enforcement to lead to people changing their behavior. Right? We don't want those enforcement fines to lead to people ending up in destitution, and we don't want those fines to be merely a nuisance that doesn't change behavior. We want them to be meaningful for everybody. But because everybody has a different income level, a $50 fine for one person could be very difficult to pay, could end up with more and more fees and interest and penalties until it's a crushing fine. And for somebody else is such a minor nuisance that they pay it just as the price of going quickly when that stop sign happened to be in the way. And so the idea behind sliding scale fines is we actually have fines that are meaningful for people based on the income of their household. And so what this bill does is it gives us a chance to add the safety component that cameras at stop signs add, but also experiment with this idea of sliding scale fines. And the hope was that, I recognize that if we were to take something that we already have in place, that already has revenue streams like cameras at stoplights or speed cameras, and add sliding scale fines to it, we might have opposition. There might be folks who are used to those systems and used to those revenue mechanisms, and so it might be a difficult place to experiment with that. But in a moment where maybe we have a chance to add a new set of camera systems, might be a good opportunity to experiment with what I hope would be something that we might look at implementing in other arenas as well. So I really look forward to the dialogue about this, and I will pass it to someone who has a great deal of expertise in this area.
Well,
and look forward to, sorry.
Before we do that, I have a very quick question.
Oh, sure.
Because this is a question I asked of the legendary Mike Gordon way back in the day about, well, if you, Mike, make 3 times as much money as I do, why shouldn't we have a system where if the fine is $100 to me, it should be $300 to you? And here's what he said. I'm not an attorney, and he was, but he said it this way. He said that constitutionally, the penalties have to be the same for everybody. You can't have that kind of a mechanism in the United States. That's what I'm not saying that he's correct, but I'm wondering, have you heard that? Is that a thing? What do you have to say about that? No, and if maybe I should ask Marceline if she's an expert in these things, but I don't know if you're an attorney or not, but.
I am not an attorney, but I can tell you that we have done these kinds of proportional fines in the United States before. There were experiments in Arizona, Iowa, New York, and Wisconsin in the past.
Oh, okay. In that case, go ahead and testify, and I'll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. For the record, Marceline White. I'm the Executive Director of Economic Action Maryland, formerly the Maryland Consumer Rights Coalition. And Economic Action Maryland works on economic rights and equity through research, education, direct service, and advocacy. We're here in strong support of House Bill 367, and I want to thank Delegate Charkoudian for bringing it. As she mentioned, one of the reasons we're so interested in this legislation is that in 2018, we released a report called No Exit, which looked at debt collection practices across Maryland, as well as usurious and difficult fines and fees, and looked at the use of fines and fees as the way that they deepened poverty and exacerbated the racial wealth gap. And one of the things we found is this very issue. Through our direct service work, we work on tax credits, we work on providing financial counseling and financial coaching for people. And one of the things we see time and time again, we also run a medical debt fund. But my point being, we see people time and time again coming to us who are in trouble because of a $50 fee or an $80 fee. So the point being that, what may seem inconsequential to somebody wealthier is very deeply meaningful and unaffordable for a lot of our low-income residents. And so what we are so supportive of this legislation is that it does create kind of fine equity or fairer fines so that the consequence is meaningful. If you are low income, a $10 or $20 fee is very meaningful. If you're very wealthy, that is meaningless practically, and it's not going to deter you from continuing to run these kinds of stop signs. So as I mentioned, there have been successful experiments in the US in the past. They were discontinued, but during that time, the average amount of fines collected and the rate of payment increased. And I'm happy to send you a paper about that. And these are the norm in Europe. So for all of these reasons, we think this is a valuable bill, and we hope you will support it.
Okay, we have, before I recognize the two virtual witnesses, I want you all to know that I've instructed counsel to ask the Attorney General about this because I think it's an important thing for us to know yes or no on. So we have Seth Grimes and Miriam Schoenbaum. So Seth is first. Seth, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes. Hey, there he is.
Maybe that should have been welcome back since I've been to the committee numerous times before. However,
that's right.
On behalf of the Washington Area Bicyclist Association, I do speak on behalf of WABA today. It is an advocacy organization with 1,300 Maryland members and many other Maryland supporters and partners. I'm WABA's Maryland organizer. WABA supports HB 367, which would authorize a local jurisdiction to install a stop sign monitoring system. Net penalty revenues would be directed to complete streets or pedestrian safety programs. The bill directs that penalties be instituted in proportion to the offending vehicle owner's or driver's income. Stop sign monitoring systems would boost compliance with traffic safety laws and signage. Installation of a camera at an intersection would improve pedestrian, bicyclist, and traffic safety at the intersection. Jurisdictions would benefit from an additional revenue source for much needed complete streets and pedestrian safety programs, which aim to improve transportation infrastructure and conditions. These programs are designed to receive, designated to receive net penalty revenue. And current fixed penalties have a disparate financial impact on offenders. They more significantly penalize lower income community members and are therefore inequitable. Income condition penalties would be more equitable than current fixed penalties. For these reasons, the Washington Area Bicyclist Association supports HB 367. We urge a favorable committee report and House of Delegates floor vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's now turn to Miriam Schoenbaum. Miriam, welcome to the committee. You have 2 minutes. You're muted. There we go.
The Action Committee for Transit of Montgomery County supports this bill. In 2022, 2 pedestrians were killed in Montgomery County at intersections controlled by stop signs. In June, Vidal Juarez Badines, 35, was crossing in a marked crosswalk with his brother at about 10 in the evening, a block from their home, when a driver hit him. He was in the hospital for 12 days before he died. And in November, Paul Shen, 46, a scientist at NIH, was crossing in a marked crosswalk on his way to work at about 8:30 in the morning when a driver hit him in front of the emergency entrance to Shady Grove Adventist Hospital. In addition, another 53 pedestrians and bicyclists who were determined by the police to not be at fault were hit by drivers at stop sign controlled intersections in Montgomery County in 2022. As drivers, we like to believe that we stop at stop signs, but most of the time we don't. We slow down, we look around, we roll through. It's a habit, and the consequences of the habit are deadly, not for us in our cars, but for the pedestrians and bicyclists we hit. Please report favorably on this bill to authorize local jurisdictions to use automated stop sign enforcement, which can encourage drivers to actually stop at stop signs.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take Sarah Samples with us back there someplace. Why don't you testify, and then we'll do questions for the whole lot of you simultaneously.
All right, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to the chair. Thank you to members of the committee. I am from MACO. My name is Sarah Sample. MACO is the Maryland Association of Counties, and we are here today to testify in support of this bill. And this is also with amendments. And so I belabored the point earlier a little bit about how, you know, pedestrian safety is super important, so I won't regale you with more stories about my nephew and his hoverboard. But I would just want to say that the important thing here is that this is enabling for counties to be able to change behavior and limit the number of violations. And so that's incredibly important to us. So that's why we'd like to support this. The only amendment that we wanted to go ahead and suggest is that the balance of any revenue that is left over after recouping costs for implementing the systems in this legislation says that it would be for pedestrian safety, I believe it is. And so the typical term that we see with some similar legislation is public safety. And so we would just suggest that for continuity with existing law, it would say that we could use it for public safety, which does encompass pedestrian safety as well. So for those reasons, MACO would support with amendments on this bill.
Are you okay with that amendment, Delegate Charkoudian?
I don't ever like to say no off the top of a question. And so I will say I'm happy to talk to MACO about it.
Okay. Many questions here. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate, thank you so much for being here today. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to speak with you prior to this bill. I've read it. I just have a couple of questions, very quick questions. I guess my first question I would start with, so when you look at speed cameras in certain jurisdictions, for example, they've come to the state asking for permission to place them in certain areas. So would this be similar to that as well too? Is each local jurisdiction going to come each time they want to place a camera? I looked at the State Highway Administration's testimony, and it was kind of unclear because they said they don't have any, well, information letter rather, and they didn't really have any best practices or guidance kind of put together in that line. So I'm just wondering, what would the process be? What we don't want to see is just them putting cameras in certain neighborhoods and certain areas that can begin to become discriminatory in practices. That's just my one piece, and I can just let you answer first.
Sure, yeah, it's a great question, and that was a lot of what I thought about in putting this together. So if you look on page 6, line 18, a local jurisdiction may use a stop sign monitoring system if, and then there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen, including the conducting a community engagement process, using safety data to determine the placement, during the community engagement process demonstrating that implementing a stop sign will decrease use of law enforcement, adding warnings and alerting drivers to the presence of it. So really recognizing a lot of the concerns about enforcement and target enforcement and bias enforcement, and trying to structure this to kind of model what enforcement should look like in a way that's not unbiased. I think if I understand the MDOT position, and again, I got that last night, so I haven't studied it and I haven't spoken to them about it, but I think my understanding of their position is that they would have to write regs that would guide local jurisdictions on how to do this. I think that's what they were saying. So it wouldn't be that every time someone wanted a stop sign camera, they'd be coming here. Local jurisdictions would have to ask MDOT if they were going to put it on a state highway, though, because the State Highway Administration would be the ones making the final decision, I think. But they would still have to do it compliant with these things that support an unbiased way of doing enforcement.
Got it. Thank you. Mr. Chair, it's my last bite of the apple, I promise.
It's a delicious apple, though, isn't it? Juicy apple.
I can't speak for any of my other colleagues. I just know you may, this is a question I'm sure many may have. I'll speak for myself, though. There's an article that says that people are living paycheck to paycheck, and you can make over 6 figures and still live from paycheck to paycheck off of 6 figures. With that in mind, it's just unique to see that fees do increase despite, a higher salary. So I want to just get some understanding along that line if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally when we're, we generally use means tested when we're trying to build justice into things, we build in income-based, and income is the best, I think, proxy that we have to get that justice in there. That doesn't mean it's perfect, and certainly someone could have a great deal of wealth, not a lot of income. Someone could have, on paper, a lot of income and extraordinary expenses. I think that I have in here, and if I don't, I could add it, that you can just pay the fee, but if you choose to go to court, I think you can still make the case that you shouldn't pay the higher fee, and if that didn't end up in here, I'd be happy to amend it. So you could theoretically show up and explain why, even though you earn 6 figures, these are your expenses that are extraordinary because of health or whatever, and pay a lower fee.
Gotcha. And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I did take, a preacher told a lie. Just one last little small question. I'm sorry.
A nibble.
Are they, are they going to swear under oath, or are they, how will they affirm that that's their income bracket?
Yeah.
I just am not sure if I saw that in here or not.
Yeah, it is. It goes, so it starts on page 7. I think it's nowhere. It happens on page 9. So basically, yeah, we tried to make it as simple as possible. So you affirm and submit the amount, and you give the state permission to check with the comptroller. So the state could choose just to check on 2% of them, but because you could be checked on, you are more likely to comply with it. So that's the structure. So it's a self-attestation with an ability for the state to check up on it.
Thank you so much, Delegate.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate, for this bill. I'm very intrigued by the concept of fine equity. I think it's a great idea. I guess I'm still not completely clear on how it would work. So if a citation is issued either by a police officer or by a speed camera, it wouldn't have an amount on it, or it would have an amount?
Yeah, so it would, just to be clear, this, I mean, if this committee wants to implement this for all fines, police officers and otherwise, I would support that. This would just be for the red
Cameras.
light camera.
I mean,
just
red light
Yeah,
camera,
yeah, that's
sorry.
right. I'm sorry, stop sign camera.
Right.
So that's all this would, yeah. So we forget what bill we're working on. And so what it would say is, it would have, like, the citation itself would say $10 if you were in this, $15 if you were in this, and the idea would be you would check the box that's like, this is what I earn, you sign it, this is, and this attests to that, and you can check up with the comptroller on me.
Okay, great. So they don't have to actually go to court to attest there?
They can go to court, but the idea is not to have everyone showing up in court to have to affirm what they earn, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Delegate Charkoudian, for bringing this bill. I'm going to go along the lines of what Delegate Long was saying earlier, but somewhat turn it around. And do you think that this could also be inequitable in that someone can say, okay, the state or the local jurisdiction has set this fee to be $40 or $50 or $30, but I have to pay, quote unquote, the fee because I make more money, and then this person, because they don't make enough money, doesn't get to pay that fee, although we both have the same infraction.
Would someone say that's not fair?
Yeah, I'm just, yeah, would someone say that?
Well, I mean, every time I get in trouble for something I shouldn't have done, I say it wasn't fair, even when the fees are the same across the board.
No, but the infraction is the same.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I think the way to think about it, and the idea behind the term day fines, right, which is what they call it in Europe, is that when I make a mistake or violate the law, I pay a half a day of my salary or a day of my salary. And when you do it, you pay a half a day of your salary. And when he does it, he pays a half a day of his salary. And so that's, while this is.
Yeah, that's a better explanation.
But that's the way to think about it, I think, that makes it more fair.
Okay, so respectfully, because I think I do know that, I think to Delegate Long's point, I could make a lot of money and literally live paycheck to paycheck. I could essentially not make a lot and just be someone who just figures it out and knows how to pay. So just so that I understand, I get an infraction, I go to court.
You don't have to go to court, you can.
I don't, but if I decide to go to court and I decide to say, hey, I did do this, is there a possibility that I can use this day this kind of sliding scale fee? Because things are kind of hard right now. So I guess
You're saying like you
what's
come
the-
in at the $100 mark, but you feel like you should have to pay the $20, so you go to court and make that case. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
I'm just having a bad month and things are a little tighter than usual, but any other time, maybe I decide that I ran it, I was running late, and I'll pay it. I'm just trying to get an idea about like the system and how it's used. Like walk me through what happens after I've made my infraction.
You make your infraction, you get your ticket. The ticket outlines this is sliding scale. If you say, well, let's see, I earn 150,000, but I really can't afford the 120. Is that what it is? I can't even see. The $120 that I have to pay for that. So then you can choose to go to court. And I have to say, if it's not in here, I'll clarify. You can choose to go to court.
Okay.
If it's that we had a couple different versions of this because it was kind of technically difficult to write. So if you all were going to move the bill and it's not clear that you could go to court and make that case that
Got
you're
it.
describing, then that is my intention. So.
Okay, so it's a choice. So it could be a choice.
Yes.
That I decide. Okay, I like that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Delegate Charkoudian, I'm not sure how I feel about this bill, quite frankly. So as I understand it, if I run a stop sign and I'm caught on a camera, I get the sliding scale. I'm subject to the sliding scale. If I run a stop sign and I'm stopped by a police officer, I pay the full fine. Okay, I don't understand. I mean, it's still the same infraction.
Yeah.
That is a little bit difficult for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
Also,
Can I answer? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I want to
Go
answer that just because, so we do have other things like points, for example, that like when you have a speed camera, I think it's a speed camera, you can get the fine but not points, but if you're pulled over by an officer, you get fine and points, right? So there's other places where we've determined that the sort of rules or what happens is different if it's a camera that catches you than if it's an officer. So that may or may not be the way to do things, but we do have other places where we have that distinction. Is that,
Okay.
am I right? No? Sorry, yeah.
I think you are right,
Yeah.
actually. I mean, I'll defer to the chairman, but I think.
Sorry, did I talk too loud?
No, that's you were correct.
No, she was
It's all
asking you
good.
if she was correct that if you get caught by a speed
Yeah,
camera,
no, that's true,
it's different.
but I will say, though, if you're caught by a camera, the penalty is less than
Yeah.
if you're caught by a human.
Yeah.
Right.
And so on average, this is less than if you were caught by a human, but if you earn more, it's not less. So yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and then my second question is also along those lines. So let's say, I run a stop sign. Let's say I'm racing down the road, right? I run a stop sign. I get. Okay, like I'm like Delegate Ciliberti. I'm racing down the road, probably the road in front of my house where everybody races down the road. So I'm racing down the road. I run a stop sign. I'm caught on the camera with the stop sign, but then I get stopped by a police officer with a radar gun further down the road, and I get a ticket for speeding. So the ticket on the stop sign would be the sliding scale, and the ticket for the speeding would not be. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
But you know what?
understand.
So here's my vision for the world. You pass this, it works out really well, and then all of them are, day fines. Like we implement this.
I understand that. I understand that. Okay. Second, I have one more question. My other question is, so I understood in your discussion with Delegate Boyce, I think it was, that when I received the citation, there is a list of the sliding scale fines. Is that correct? And it's based on income? So anyone who gets a citation under this bill would get the list of sliding citations. Or get the list of the sliding
Yes, everyone
fine.
would see what it is, yeah.
Everyone would see what it is.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm a fan of transparency.
Are you concerned at all that might foster some resentment or?
I think that's part of what Delegate Boyce was asking about. I'm honestly, I think economic injustice should foster resentment and outrage. So, like, yeah, I mean, there's so much that's unjust about how we structure so many things. And so this, I mean, like, it's not to say it doesn't foster resentment, but I think there is legitimate resentment around people who are overburdened by our current structures. And so to have people see a different sort of structure, like, yeah, it might be uncomfortable for folks, maybe would foster resentment, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. You know, it would be a change, right? People are uncomfortable with change for sure. But, you know, somewhere along the line, we have to start addressing an unjust system that we're currently functioning in. This may or may not be the way you all choose to do that, but it may cause some resentment when people see a more, you know, people who are used to kind of benefiting from the system see a more just, you know, different structure in front of them.
If I could just
Okay,
add
thank you.
to, I mean, on that point, to me, if a fine is supposed to be a deterrent and it's supposed to stop you from engaging in the activity time and time again, it needs to be meaningful to you. It needs to be consequential. I mean, you see that, you know, in consumer protection, it's why people ask, sometimes we come back and ask for higher fines for violations. So it's the same kind of idea. If the fine doesn't mean anything to you because you can afford it and it's just $10, you're going to keep doing it. Again, that could be devastating for someone else. So I think it's really about, if a fine is supposed to be a deterrent, then it needs to be consequential enough to make people think twice.
Okay, thank you. I would just state, and then I'll stop, that I think the points for people who can afford the fines are more consequential than the fines. So I just state that for the record. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate Charkoudian. Obviously, we were thinking along the same lines about some things. I'm still trying to understand a little bit about what you're proposing here. I mean, economic inequities are built into our whole system of our whole economy,
Everything, yes.
right? I mean, so making it just on this kind of thing seems like you're not really addressing the larger issue in reality. I mean, you're only taking it for, you know, I understand that you want to make this more global later on and all of that, but still, even if you're only addressing fines and fees and so forth, you're not really addressing the underlying inequities of the whole economy. And I'm not suggesting that we should become a socialist state, but I am asking the question because if it seems to me the fascinating part about this is about the time. I've often thought that instead of making it a sliding scale for money.
This is going to wind up as a question.
This is going to be a question. Don't you think that it would be more equitable than what you're proposing to actually have a system where people have to spend time in community service for everybody has the same number of hours in the day, no matter who you are. Nobody has 28 hours in their day, and nobody has 12 hours in their day. If you have to give up 3 hours of your week to do some kind of community service when you get one of these tickets, that seems to be more meaningful, and it doesn't get us mired in all of this economic issues. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think your broader point about everything that has to change to make our society more just, I'm 100% with you on. I have a bunch of other bills in economic matters that are addressing some of those issues, but the fines and enforcement is one of the issues. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're proposing another way that starts to get at that. Like, there's a number of different ways I think we could get at that. So that's another one, and it's not a bad idea.
Thank you.
Before I recognize the next person, I will tell you that I'm a liberal Democrat who actually likes free market capitalism because it's the reason we land people on the moon faster than other countries. So that's just my opinion. Next question goes to, Healy off, Ryan Narwaki on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. Delegate, I certainly understand what you're trying to get at with this bill. But I do have some concerns also, maybe similar to what others have echoed. So we know that some very wealthy folks have some very aggressive tax avoidance strategies, right? Where some folks that are have more wealth certainly than us humble public servants in this room have way more than us, may show no income a year, may show a very low income a year. So isn't it possible that if we put this kind of system in place, that it could be more regressive in ways where someone who is extremely wealthy, I mean, we have billionaires in this country sometimes that pay no taxes or very few taxes, could pay less for a fine than someone that is making, just the minimum wage or just scraping by. Isn't that possible that that could happen in this sort of system?
Yes, and our colleagues in Ways and Means need to fix that. But in the meantime, I think that it is, so yeah, that is possible. And I think in the extremes, it may happen. But I think for the most part, we accept that, we have all kinds of things that are means tested, right? Like we have means tested safety net services, we have means tested, assistance to go to summer camp, we have, that are on different scales. And so I think that the fact that we have unjust tax structures or imperfect tax structures shouldn't mean that then we wait for that to be perfect before we try to add, a justice-based structure in other parts of our policies.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Delegate.
Good
Thanks for being here. Not surprisingly, I'm going to take this conversation in a slightly different direction and ask you the same question that I asked earlier. A number of states are moving to more deterrent-based things like flashing lights around stop signs and things like that to really reinforce, hey, you need to stop here. Would you consider that instead of cameras?
I think that's a really important step. I mean, this particular proposal is cameras. I think that there's a value for cameras, but yeah, I mean, I think that's really good too. And if we get that this year and not this, that would be progress.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Delegate. I also have mixed feelings about this. I totally get the issues around economic justice. We've certainly talked in this committee over the last few years about this idea, which is very real, of the criminalization of poverty with these, fines, especially in the context of MVA and MDOT and penalties and all of that. So two questions. One is around what I'm going to, for lack of a better term, call like a scenario of a serial offender. And I'm going to sort of talk about not the lowest income folks or the really well-to-do folks, which you used in the beginning to sort of illustrate the idea behind the bill, but what about somebody somewhere in the middle? And I don't know what that price point looks like, where it's not enough, it's too little to deter them from continuing to do this over and over again. Is that a concern? And in second part of the question is there any data on that anywhere?
So the data that Marceline brought was around people being more likely to pay the fines. I'm not sure if we have data on whether people change their behavior in places other than if a sliding scale day fine changes behavior differently than any other kind of a fine.
We have data from Europe that talks about the deterrent and the role that plays, and I recognize Maryland is not Europe, although we are the same size as Ireland. So, I can certainly share that data with you to let you know that it has proven effective in a lot of other places.
But do we not need a balance? Do we not want a deterrent factor somehow in here? Are you not concerned about that? And I'm asking that respectfully. I don't mean to suggest you are not being thoughtful.
No, I appreciate that. No, I think these are deterrent amounts. I mean, these amounts are kind of the equivalent of if we think that a normal fine would be $50 for running a stop sign, then you take that and you go down, if that's like for an average, if you assume that that's right for someone earning the average wage in this state, and then you go down and up from there, like that's what you have. So roughly. So I think that is the idea, is that these should be deterrents, that if you are earning, if you are earning $20,000 a year and you're getting a couple of $10 fines, that is a deterrent at that level. And if you're earning $150,000 a year and you get a handful of $120 fines, that is a deterrent at that level. But I'm happy to raise the higher end of it if you think that we need more of a deterrent there, you know.
Okay. And then a second question for the bill sponsor, Mr. Chairman, and then one question actually for a comment, Chair Barvey, that you made, if you don't mind. I mean, just something I think I missed, a point you made. So my second question for the sponsor and this panel is around why stop signs? Why did you not look at something else? And the reason, let me finish this, is you know, my understanding is that running a stop sign is right up there in terms of traffic infractions with potentially the most dangerous thing you can do. It can lead to horrific accidents. It does lead to horrific accidents. Why would you choose running a stop sign as for this bill and not some other traffic violation?
Well, so we heard some data from Montgomery County about people who were killed and hit in accidents, 56 accidents from running a stop sign. It is very dangerous. I had people in my community ask me to put this bill in because there's some stop signs in neighborhoods in our district that people continue to run, and is very frightening for the people who live in those neighborhoods. And so as I started looking at pros and cons of cameras at stop signs, it got me on this path of thinking about what would be the just way to use cameras more broadly. So if we're gonna bring in something new, right? So like we don't have a system already in place that we're changing for like speeding cameras or something. We're bringing in something new. This could be the venue and the opportunity to build a sense of justice around it because it's new. So there were people interested in the stop sign issue, bringing that to my attention. I recognize that is a very dangerous, those are dangerous intersections. Delegate Healy already had that, so I was like, what do I want to do that's different? And so I added these pieces that I think, in this conversation, I'm grateful for how thoughtful this committee is, like really important conversations that we need to have about what are the right ways to build kind of justice into our fine structures. So that's sort of the story behind how we got this.
So that's helpful, and that's part of the answer I was looking for. But I guess I am more focused on the part, not on the camera piece of it, but the adjusted fines, just given how serious it is to run a stop sign and how potentially deadly it is to do that. You know, I just wonder if that's the best first use of this approach to a more fair, for that violation specifically.
I think I don't see this as a lenient approach. I guess maybe that's the distinction. I see this as an approach that brings meaning to the fine for people at different levels. I don't see it as something that's lenient. And so if you think the numbers are too low, that would make it lenient, and maybe we need to ramp them up. But I think the idea behind this is that people are going to change their behavior because the price they're seeing is meaningful to their income. So if you see it as lenient, we could kind of bump all of it up. But I don't see this as lenient. I see it as meaningful, and the goal is to change the behavior.
Okay.
Because it's so dangerous.
Okay, I can talk with you more offline about that. Thank you. And then, Mr. Chairman, you made a comment about an inquiry with the Attorney General, and what is that about? What would be the focus?
I mean, I'd been told by a delegate who was an attorney back when the pterodactyls still filled the skies that this kind of a fine scheme is not constitutional. And I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I did ask Patrick to ask the Attorney General. You know, I think it's an important thing for us to know, generally speaking. Because, you know, the funny thing is, from a policy standpoint, I don't have a problem with fining rich people more for the more dangerous crimes, like, believe it or not, I think what Bernie Madoff did was a lot worse than rolling past a stop sign than a stop sign. I know that you shouldn't roll past stop signs. I'm not advocating that, but I mean, you know, it's like all the CEOs who took down the American economy in 2009, I think if we're going to be doing sliding scale fines, I think I'd rather do it there. As much of a capitalist as I am, I think I'd rather do it there than on stop signs, but that's just me. We do have a couple of more questions, and let me just say that this kind of conversation is not something I would have ever encouraged if we had 5 more bills. Delegate Terrazza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm grateful we don't have 5 more bills either. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this legislation. I think it's the idea of building equity into our fining system is so important, and I'm glad that you brought it. So I, like, maybe a little different than what some of the other folks are saying. I frankly think a stop sign would be a good place to do it because they're very dangerous, and this is, you know, we're kind of creating a sliding scale that should be meaningful, but I think where I'm a little concerned is adding cameras to stop signs, and wondered if you had considered or would consider doing this for some place that there's already cameras in existence.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I would, you know, I think there's a value to adding cameras to stop signs. And again, if it were the committee's decision to not do that, but instead make our red light cameras sliding scale instead, I think that would be progress, right? Like, I think that would be really important progress. Part of why I thought it made sense to do it here, I do recognize that if we were to do that, and someone were to do the calculation that, you know, like jurisdictions that are counting on that revenue, it's not supposed to be a revenue generating, but someone who's counting on that revenue, you know, may be more likely to resist that change in that system, or someone who's used to that system may be more likely to resist. So it had been my thought that it made sense, the reason it made sense to do it together was this is something new, so no, there's not a system in place already, so as we're building this new system, you know, do it here. Having said that, I think it's great progress if we put this anywhere, so if that's what the committee decides to do with it, I think that's also progress.
A quick follow-up. To your point, and I appreciate the point about, and perhaps you didn't say it this way, but there be more resistance if you're hitting something that already exists and is an expectation. But if you're doing a sliding scale, doesn't that theoretically kind of that should even things out?
Potentially, yeah, we would find out how close to just, you know, or how close to the median income average, like our current fine structure is, which, you know, I don't know if it is or not.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. It could theoretically come out the same.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate this discussion and your bill.
Thanks.
And the last question goes to Deborah Davis.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Delegate and Marceline, I can't let you guys leave here without making a statement and a question before we shut down. Well, thank you for forcing us to have this conversation. It is really progressive thought to deal with the criminalization of poverty. We throw out fines all day long, but no one thinks about people outside of this room who probably can't afford it. And I wanted to just give you kudos for that. And I wanted to dispel one of the other theories that someone else had. If you run a stop sign and you cause an accident, the penalties and the points are, there are penalties and points, aren't there?
Yes, there are.
Thank you.
Yes, additional, yes, there are.
Additional penalty and points. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, well, what an interesting day this was. Announcements. Announcements from subcommittee chairs. Okay, we have Delegate Love.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Motor vehicles and transportation will meet. Patrick, can we do 5 o'clock? What time is it now? 4:42? 5 o'clock.
And is that going to be Zoom?
I
just went to check and I didn't have a link.
You
Oh, that's right, they're all Zoom.
haven't gotten the link? We will resend the link right away.
Do you know what time it was sent?
I don't,
Because I
but
have a lot of Sarah.
I'll send it right now, so you'll know.
Okay.
5 o'clock on Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, any other announcements? All right, any announcements? Yes.
Sorry. Did you already say we are meeting tomorrow, right? I just want to.
Yeah, we have public hearings tomorrow. We're not
What?
voting today. We're going to vote next Thursday. We're having public hearings tomorrow.
Great.
Don't drive home after floor session.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty then, we are adjourned. Okey dokey pokey.